Chapter 301. When Dean came to the front of the building, he saw that the building had long been a desolate ruin. Lush vines from the window-sill, the door and other places, like a green viper, covered most of the building. Concrete. Dean was startled as he saw the rough cement on the surface of the building. The style of the building was very similar to the houses of the old era. It looked like a small bungalow. However, the color of the cement and the degree of damage on the walls were not as bad as the outside of the wall. It was built by the barbarians? Old Foulin said that the barbarians drank blood. How did they know how to build such a building? Dean was puzzled. Is it the place where the survivors of the catastrophe lived 300 years ago? The descendants of those people all lived here and then left 50 years ago? If a building had been inhabited for more than 200 years, then it was possible to preserve it in good condition. Dean was surprised as he looked at the building hidden in the depths of the woods. He was alarmed when he heard the sound of Splitter approaching. He was relieved as he saw that Splitter didn't have any intention to attack. He stepped on the weeds on the ground and entered the familiar style of the building. Squeak! The door of the building was slowly pushed open and the dust fell. The whole building seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Dean looked around and found some rusty iron locks and animal traps in the room. In addition, there were some simple furniture and bed. Clothes were scattered on the floor, and the furniture was overturned on the ground. It was a mess. It seemed that the owner of the house had turned over the house after he left. Dudian walked in step by step. He pushed open the doors and looked at the rooms inside. Some rooms were empty, without any belongings. They were occupied by moss and vines. There were a few snakes in the corner. When they heard the sound of the door opening, the snakes seemed to know that he was a dangerous existence. They immediately shrank into the gaps in the corners and drilled into the snake hole. Dean retracted his gaze and left the room. He continued to walk into the building. Bang! The new Splitter came in from behind. Its huge body collapsed the door frame. Dean looked back, worried that it would run around and destroy the weak house, burying him alive. He quickly looked around, but didn't see anything strange, so he immediately turned around and left. Bang! At this moment, Dean returned to the living room and was ready to leave. The Splitter's body sank and fell down. The ground under its feet was empty. Is there a basement? Dudian was startled. He quickly rushed over and looked inside. The pitch-black underground did not affect his vision, and he immediately saw a scene that stunned him. There was actually a secret room below, and on the walls of the secret room, there were all kinds of experimental tools and some sharp weapons. In addition, there were also a few huge, experimental tables. Secret laboratory? Dean was startled. He hesitated for a moment but jumped down from the edge of the hole. He landed next to the new Splitter. He opened up a distance from it and looked around. He found that the inside was extremely spacious. It had a diameter of more than 300 square meters. It was equivalent to a small basketball court. Moreover, there seemed to be a corner in front of him that wasn't sealed. Dean was not in a hurry to check, but looked around. He saw 2 experimental tables stained with dried blood. The experimental tables were slanted, and there was a dent of about 20 centimeters on the edge of one of the tables. It seemed that something had hit it, and the steel pipe on the edge of the metal table was pressed into an arc. His nose sniffed and smelled another experiment table covered with a white cloth. It exuded a faint rotten smell and the stench of bones. He was familiar with this smell. It was similar to the monster skeletons that could be seen everywhere in the ruins outside the giant wall. Dean's eyes were dignified. He stepped forward and pulled the white cloth off the table. Crash! The white cloth fell to the ground. The thing on the platform was revealed in front of him. It turned out to be a human skeleton. Dean's eyes flashed as he looked at the human skeleton. The height and shape of the skeleton were no different from an ordinary human. The only difference was that there were 2 extremely sharp teeth in the mouth of the skeleton. They were much sharper than the general canine teeth. They were about the length of a finger. It was not difficult to imagine the appearance of the skeleton when it was alive. The fangs would reach the chin from the mouth. Fanged people? Dean frowned. He felt that he had strayed into a dark secret. This secret was either related to the virus outside the giant wall or the barbarians. He carefully looked at the skeleton. Except for the fangs, there were no other characteristics. He immediately memorized the characteristics in his mind. He turned around and looked at the other parts of the laboratory. There was a row of huge glass jars. It was often used by biologists to soak biological tissues. The smell of formalin was exuding from the jars. 2 of the jars were broken. There was only light green water inside. It was obvious that the water had long been contaminated. The rest of the jars were soaked with tongues, hearts, and other parts. There was even a skin soaked in one of the jars. It was the skin of a human face. Dean slightly frowned. After looking around, he slowly walked towards the corner in front of him. It seemed that the new splitter was quite hungry. It stood in front of the jars and didn't take any action. It seemed that it was sniffing the quality of the food. It paused for a moment and turned away. It didn't touch the things inside the jars. It followed behind Dean. Its scythe-like arms gently rubbed against each other. Dean looked back at the splitter and quickened his pace a little. He didn't want to arouse the beastly nature of the splitter in this dark environment. Soon, Dean came to the corner and saw a corridor leading to another room. Dean was about to step into the corridor when he saw a handled device on the wall. Is there a mechanism? Dean pondered for a moment. He stopped in front of the passage and turned to look at the new splitter. He saw that the new splitter slowly walked over. It also stopped when it saw Dean stop. Dean thought for a moment. He pulled out a piece of dried blood and threw it into the passage. The attention of the new splitter seemed to be attracted by the blood. It looked at the falling blood but still stood motionless. Dean was in a dilemma as he tried to think of other ways. At this time, the new splitter slowly moved forward and entered the passage. Dean's eyes lit up. He quickly grabbed the handle on the wall and pulled it down. Gotcha! Suddenly, the sound of gears turning echoed. A huge iron cage fell from the passage. The position of the cage didn't completely match the place where the new splitter was standing. The edge of the cage pressed against the scythe-like arms of the new splitter. The scythe-like arms shrank back in lightning speed due to the pain. The cage fell to the ground. The new splitter was locked inside. Chapter 302. However, this pleasant surprise was fleeting. The newborn splitter was suddenly trapped by the iron cage. As if it was frightened, it angrily swung its scythe-like arms. With several sharp clanging sounds, the iron cage suddenly broke. Dean's mouth twitched. He knew that he was thinking too much. He slowly retreated so that the latter wouldn't vent its anger on him. However, the newborn splitter obviously did not vent its anger on him. After cutting off the iron cage, it turned around. After seeing that there was no more movement, it walked into the passage. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and followed into the passage. Soon, he came to a spacious laboratory inside the passage. It seemed to be a storage room. There were several dusty shelves on the ground, but the goods on them had been swept away. He looked around and saw a table covered with cobwebs. It looked like a desk, and there was an oil lamp on it. Dean casually opened the drawer under the desk, and a black snake suddenly jumped out. Dean stretched out his hand like lightning and pinched it. His other hand grabbed the snake's tail and pulled it. Bang! The snake was torn into 2 pieces and thrown to the other side of the wall. The new splitter smelled the blood and rushed over to eat it. Dean opened another drawer and saw a book with a black cover. There were several strange characters on it. They were similar to the giant wall, but there were some differences. Dean picked it up and looked at it. There were many words written on it, but he didn't know any of them. It's not English or Chinese. Is it the characters of other countries? Dean frowned as he turned a few pages. He put away the book. He would go back to see if there were any records of such characters in the superchip. Dean put away the book and glanced around. He saw that there was nothing left. He was slightly disappointed. He looked at the new splitter and saw that it was looking at him. It gently rubbed its scythe arm. Dean had some scruples in his heart. I have to find a way to trap this little guy. I can't kill it, but I don't have the conditions to trap it. If I can communicate with old Foulin, then I can build a cage and lock it inside. But I can't contact old Foulin for the time being. I have to get out of here as soon as possible. I have to help this little guy hunt, or it will be hungry and will likely hunt its own kind. Thinking of this, he sighed in his heart and rubbed his fingers, thinking of a solution. Dean sighed. He could only choose a compromise. It was impossible to trap the newborn splitter. Although he wanted to take it as his own, but the conditions didn't allow him to do so. He could only temporarily release it. With the Holy Church's hunting ability, they won't be able to find it so quickly. Even if they find it, it will be very difficult to kill it. I just need to find it before the Holy Church. If I'm unlucky and the Holy Church finds it first, then I can only hunt the big guy outside the giant wall. Dean secretly made up his mind. Although he knew that it was a bit self-comforting, but at the moment he could only do so. He took a deep look at the newborn splitter, who seemed to be dozing off. He picked up the book and slowly bypassed it, returning from the passage. Before it could catch up with him, he quickly jumped out of the underground laboratory and ran out of the building. Bang! The new splitter also jumped out of the basement. But as soon as it climbed out, it crushed the ground and fell back into it. Dean took the opportunity and quickly ran in one direction. After a few minutes he heard a rustling sound behind him. He looked back and saw the new splitter chasing after him. Dean wasn't surprised. It was difficult for him to win against the latter by speed alone. But it was different with the help of the terrain. Soon, a wild wolf appeared in front of him. After a long period of radiation mutation, this wild wolf's physique was extremely large, like a calf. Its hair was wet and stuck to its body, and its body constantly secreted stinky sweat. The mutated wolf saw Dean, and immediately howled and rushed over. Dean pounced on it head-on. The moment it jumped, he punched its jaw. Bang! The lower jaw bone was broken, and its body flew out. Dean didn't stop. He grabbed its tail and continued to run forward. It didn't take long for him to follow the direction of the smell. He ran to a small lake. A faint fishy smell floated from the lake. The lake water was turbid. He could faintly see a shadow swimming in the dirty water. Dean lifted the mutant wolf and crushed its head with his foot. He completely killed it and smashed it on the ground. The bones in its body were broken. At the same time, a strong smell of blood exuded out. He saw that the shadow in the lake was a bit darker. Apparently, it was attracted by the smell of blood and floated to a higher position under the water. Dean shook the mutant wolf so that its blood spilled into the lake. At this time, the new splitter also caught up. Dean looked back at it and waved the mutant wolf's body. He waited for it to come close before throwing the mutant wolf into the lake. The new splitter immediately stopped by the lake. Dean slowly retreated a few steps and looked at it with vigilance. Puff, puff. At this time, the sound of tumbling echoed from the lake. As the mutant wolf's body fell into the lake, the thing hidden under the dirty water quickly swam out and fiercely fought for the mutant wolf. Occasionally, a black giant tail covered with scales would come out of the water and set off big waves. As the fight at the bottom of the lake became more and more intense, more blood flowed out and the smell of blood became stronger. The new splitter was stimulated by the strong smell of blood. It could no longer hold back and jumped into the lake. Its scythe-like arms quickly moved. The water around its body was quickly dyed red. Apparently, it killed the thing that got close to it. Dean was relieved as he saw this scene. He didn't expect that the splitter wasn't afraid of water. Moreover, it had thin wings. It was simply a tri-habitat monster. although the size of the wings couldn't support its flight, but it was still a monster with wings. Whoosh! He seized the opportunity to turn around and run. There were a lot of mutant creatures at the bottom of the lake. The new splitter swam in the lake and quickly killed the mutant creatures that attacked it. Soon more than 10 meters of the lake's surface was filled with bright red blood. The waves were surging. It was extremely terrifying. I thought that I couldn't use the lake, so I would use gullies or natural wells. Now it's much easier. But the mutant creatures at the bottom of the lake won't be able to hold me for long. I have to eliminate my smell to get rid of it. Dean picked up some large leaves from the roadside after running for thousands of meters. He scraped the blood off his body and rolled it in the leaf. This was an important thing that could lure the great splitter. He wouldn't exchange it for 1,000 gold coins. As he ran, he scraped the plasma. After scraping out a lump, he pulled out some weeds and rubbed them on his body. First, the weeds could rub off the remaining plasma. Second, the smell of the weed juice could more or less cover the smell of the plasma. Dean looked back after running for more than 10 miles. He saw that the little splitter hadn't chased him. His heart was a little relieved. He followed the smell and found a muddy swamp. He saw several hidden swamp crocodiles. He didn't pay attention to them. He ran to the edge of the swamp and smeared the mud on his body. At this time, the hidden swamp crocodiles slowly swam over. Their 4 or 5 meters long body was quite terrifying, but compared to the more than 10 meters long body of the magic claw crocodile, they looked petite and cute. Dean saw a swamp crocodile slowly approaching him. He pretended to reach out to grab the mud in front of it. Whoosh! The swamp crocodile suddenly opened its bloody mouth and rushed over. Dean was prepared for it. He withdrew his hand like lightning. The swamp crocodile seemed to be stunned as it bit the air. Dean didn't show any mercy. He grabbed its mouth and dragged its body to the shore. He grabbed its upper jaw with one hand and the lower jaw with the other. He fiercely pulled its upper jaw back. The swamp crocodile wanted to take the opportunity to bite him, but as soon as it opened its mouth, its upper jaw was forcefully twisted towards the top of its head, and it continued to be twisted. Suddenly, it broke, and blood spurted out. The swamp crocodile twisted its body in pain. Dudian punched the crocodile's head and stepped on the inside of its jaw. Both of his hands pulled the upper jaw at the same time. Puff! The upper jaw of the swamp crocodile was twisted off. The skin on the skull was torn off. It died on the spot. Dean wasn't polite. He took out the blood from the crocodile's brain and smeared it all over his body to cover up the smell. He immediately abandoned the body of the swamp crocodile. He recalled the previous route of escape. The living area should be in the north and the giant wall should be in the south. He ran at full speed. It shouldn't be able to find me for a while because of the mud and other blood. Dean's eyes flashed. I can only sneak into the city. I have to stay there for another 7 days if I enter the clean guard station. I don't have time to waste there. Moreover, the Holy Church will link the destruction of the barrier and the death of the Knights of Light to me. I'll have to trouble old Foulin to testify that I've been staying in the Ryan Castle. Dean was thinking about the follow-up troubles and countermeasures as he ran. It didn't take long for him to reach the fortress. According to the military reports from the past half a month, the barbarians have attacked Snow City Stronghold and Red Coral Stronghold. Although these two strongholds have been defended, they must be heavily guarded. However, the Desert Rock Stronghold, which is further away from them, should have fewer troops. Dean looked at the fortress from afar. He lurked in the nearby grass and sniffed the smell in the air. Half a minute later, he came out of the grass. Everything was as he expected. He lowered his body and lurked in the middle of the fortress where there was less smell. Chapter 303. Whoosh! It was almost dusk, and the setting sun was shining on the towering rock walls of the fortress. Dean was like a gecko as he climbed along the wall. When he came to the front of the sharp wooden stakes, he saw that the patrolling soldiers on both sides were separated from each other and patrolled to the other side. He quickly jumped into the fortress and rubbed his hands against the wall to slow down the force of his fall. After landing, he rolled over to minimize the sound of his fall. Dean quickly glanced around. He saw that there were several patrolling soldiers in the distance. They were far away from him. He immediately rushed to the other side. He had the experience of smuggling last time, so this time he was more familiar with it. He bypassed the patrols of the guards and came to the desolate wilderness of the fortress. It didn't take long for him to meet a desolate town. I didn't expect that every time I sneak in I would be naked. Dean smiled as he sneaked into the town. He sneaked into the backyard of a house. He stole a set of clothes and put them on. Then he quickly left the town. He took advantage of the darkness and ran towards the direction of Yard Town. A few hours later, Dean arrived at the Yard Town. The sky was dark and the curfew would be coming soon. Dean glanced at the hillside behind the town. The Ryan Castle stood there quietly like a giant beast in the night. Ryan Castle. The study room on the second floor. Sander helped his father to return to his room after dinner. He waited for old Foulin to sit down. Sander took out a thick blanket from the closet and handed it to his father. "It's cold now. Cover yourself with a blanket and sit down." Old Foulin took the blanket and covered his knees. He sighed. "He hasn't come back for so long. I don't know what happened to him." Sander comforted. "Although he is young, but he is mature and cautious. There shouldn't be any big problems. Don't worry. Maybe he will come back in a few days. It doesn't matter if he is mature or immature. The monsters won't talk about these etiquette." Old Foulin shook his head and sighed. Sandro saw his worried face under the lamp and pondered for a while. He said, "Why don't we urge those people to go and take a look? After all, they were bailed out by Mr. Dew. If they don't return this favor, it would be too inhumane. If they are humane, then they won't go to such a dirty place. Even if they are humane, they will be worn out." Old Foulin shook his head. "If there is no news by tomorrow, then find 2 smart people and temporarily put them into hunters. Let them go and see." "Yes." Sander nodded. Old Foulin sighed. "Our Ryan family is rising. Many aristocrats, small aristocrats and well-known rich businessmen want to join our consortium. It seems that we are thriving. But all of this is thanks to him. If we didn't have his identity as an architect, then it wouldn't take long for the Ryan family to return to its original state." Sander was silent for a moment. "Father, we can't rely on him for everything. If he had an accident in the future, wouldn't our whole family decline?" Old Foulin stared at him. "If we don't rise, then how can we talk about decline? I don't want to hear you mention it again in the future." Sander's face slightly changed as he saw his father's anger. "Father, I know I was wrong." Old Foulin slowly recovered his eyes as he saw his father bow his head and apologize. He looked at the burning oil lamp and fell into deep thoughts. His weather-beaten eyes reflected the flames of the lamp. Whoosh! After a moment, a slight sound echoed from outside the window. Old Foulin and Sander were surprised. They looked up and saw a figure dressed like a farmer enter the room. Sander was about to call out "Assassin," but he was stunned as he saw the appearance of the person. "What? Don't you recognize me after changing clothes?" Dean smiled as he came to the table and sat down. He looked at old Foulin. "I made you worry. Did anything happen while I was outside the giant wall?" Old Foulin looked at him. He sighed and smiled. "It's good that you're back. I thought the Mellon family didn't make any movement. I don't know what they are plotting. We don't have any spies. The intelligence is too weak." Dean frowned and thoughtfully nodded. "What about the little guys that I brought back?" "Little guys?" Old Foulin smiled as he heard Dean's name. "They aren't little. One of them is almost as old as me. I've sent people to pay attention to them. Except for the butler Nicholas, The rest of them have been staying in the castle every day. They haven't gone out. Dean raised his eyebrows. What about the butler? Where did he go? He hasn't gone out either. He has been staying in your castle every day. Old Fourline replied. Dean's mouth curved into a smile. I know. I came to nag you tonight. As you can see, I just came back from outside the giant wall. Moreover, I came back illegally. If the Holy Church investigates, you can help me as a witness. You came back illegally? Old Fourline was surprised. You didn't go to the cleaners? Old Fourline patted his head. Yes, I would have gotten the news if I had gone. Why did you come back illegally? Is there something that the Holy Church can't know about? Dean nodded. There was a bit of a mess in the passage. When I came back, I found that a monster had broken through the passage and killed the Knights of Light. I was worried that they would misunderstand that I deliberately let the monster in. So I sneaked into the city so that they wouldn't misunderstand me. I wouldn't have any evidence to explain. Old Fourline and Sander were surprised. They looked at each other. Old Fourline asked, Are you hurt? Did the monster come in by mistake when it was chasing you? Dean shook his head and smiled. I found it when I came back. It's a coincidence that I can't explain it clearly. Old Fourline looked at him. That's right. You are the architect of the Temple of Elements. Your credibility is very high. No one will doubt you if you say that you didn't do it. You don't have to take such risks in the future. Dean said, That's one of the reasons. The second reason is that I don't want to have any relationship with the hunters. Hunters will become my sideline. Even if I go outside the giant wall, I must do it in secret. You should know that the aristocracy discriminates against the hunters and look up to the architects. If I want to maximize the spread of my influence, then I must abandon one aspect. Of course, I can't say to abandon it, but to put it in the dark. Old Fourline smiled. I know that you have other reasons. That is your main purpose. I don't need to worry about you. Every time you think about my concerns in advance and do it. My personal suggestion is that you don't need to hunt anymore. You can rely on the money earned from the works to hire others to hunt. You don't need to take the risk yourself. Dean smiled. I know that there must be other reasons. That is your main purpose. You don't need to worry about it. My personal suggestion is that you don't need to hunt anymore. You can rely on the money earned from the works to hire others to hunt. There is no need to take the risk yourself. Chapter 304. Dean slightly frowned and sneered. The Melon Consortium doesn't dare to attack the architect of the Temple of Elements. They want to use this roundabout way to weaken my prestige and influence in the aristocracy. They want to take advantage of the long-time rejection and disgust of hunters by the aristocracy. Yes. Old Fourline nodded. So we can't let them succeed. You will stay in the Temple of Elements and fight back against them. Dean shook his head. I don't have time to stay in the temple. But I have to go back to the Temple of Elements to buy some materials. I can solve this matter on the way. Old Fourline looked at him for a moment. All right, you handle this matter yourself. Dean nodded and got up. It's getting late. I'll go back first. If the temple comes to investigate, tell them that I've been here. All right, I'll handle this matter. Old Fourline agreed. Dean left the main entrance of the Ryan Castle under the escort of Old Fourline and Sandro. His sudden appearance surprised the other members and servants of the castle. They didn't know when the young man had appeared in the castle. It was curfew time when he returned to the yard town. But Dean was sitting in the carriage of the Ryan family. He was unimpeded all the way. After a few hours, he returned to his castle by the Mosa River. There was a faint light on the second floor of the castle. Apparently there were people who hadn't slept yet. There was a trace of coldness in Dean's eyes. The carriage stopped and he got off. 2 knights from the Ryan family recognized Dean. They didn't expect that the young master would come back late at night. They were surprised and quickly came forward to greet him. They opened the door of the castle for him. Dean entered the castle and opened the door of the hall. He saw that there were 2 oil lamps in the hall. The light was weak, and there was no one in the empty hall. He sat down at the table and looked at the guard. "Call the butler and Ollie from the kitchen." The guard was nervous as he saw Dean's face. He replied, "Yes." After he finished speaking, he quickly ran up the stairs. A moment later, a series of hurried footsteps came from the 2nd floor. The guard and Nicholas rushed over one after the other. Nicholas was standing on the 2nd floor's handrail when he saw the familiar figure sitting in the hall. His expression changed slightly, but in the next moment, he put on a surprised smile and hurried forward, saying, "Young master, you're back?" Dudian glanced at him but didn't care about the surprise on his face. He coldly said, "Make me tea." Nicholas answered, "Yes." He picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea for Dean. Dean glanced at the tea and coldly said, "There is no heat at all. How can this be called tea?" Nicotine's expression changed slightly, but he quickly revealed an apologetic expression and said, "It's this little one's fault. I'll go boil some water for you." After he finished speaking, he turned around and ran into the kitchen, just in time to run into the chef Ollie, who came out from another side room. His face immediately became serious, and he shouted, "Quickly go boil water, the young master is back, what are you dawdling for? After boiling water, cook some of the young master's favorite snow rabbit rib." The chef, Ollie, was a middle-aged man in his 30s. He had just been woken up from his sleep. Hearing the young master calling him, he put on his clothes and hurried over. When he heard Nicotine's words, he was startled for a moment, then he quickly agreed and turned around to go to the kitchen. "Ollie, come here," Dudian called out. Ollie was startled. He immediately stopped and looked at Nicotine. He quickly bypassed him and came to stand in front of Dean. "Master, what do you want me to do?" Dean didn't reply to him but turned to Nicotine. "You go boil the water. I have something to do with Ollie." Nicotine's face slightly changed. He forced a smile. "Yes." He turned and walked into the kitchen. Nicotine boiled the water after a while. Fortunately, he had been a butler since childhood, so he was very familiar with the work of the servants. Soon he returned to the hall with a pot of boiling water. The hall was dead silent. Alan was standing in front of Dean. Dean was sitting at the table. His fingers were gently tapping on the table. His face was calm and unfathomable. He felt a chill in his heart and smiled. "Young master, the water is here." Dean nodded. "Put it here. Go and call the others." "Now?" Nicotine was startled. Dudian looked at him and indifferently said, "Why? Is it late?" Nicholas quickly said, not late, I'll go now." Finished speaking, he quickly went upstairs. After a moment, Sergei, Gwyneth and Jean came down from upstairs. They saw Dean sitting in the hall. Sergei and Gwyneth looked at each other. They saw the meaning in each other's eyes as they went down the stairs. Jean was the first to go downstairs. He was still wearing his pajamas. He looked at Dean in surprise. "You finally came back. We thought." Suddenly he thought of something. He looked around and his face turned ugly. Old hey." Dean looked at him and whispered, "I tried my best." He was unlucky. Jin's eyes turned red. "I don't blame you. It's just that his body." Dean was silent. "There is no way to bring it back." Old Jean clenched his fists and lowered his head. "It's all my fault. I'm too weak. If I was stronger like Sergei, maybe I could have killed that thing." Dean looked at him but didn't say anything. He turned to look at Sergei and Gwyneth. Sergei smiled as he saw Dudian. "I didn't expect you to be so lucky. We thought that you were taken away by a monster. We waited for you at the entrance for 3 days but didn't see you come back. It's reasonable to say that your chances of survival are slim. But your luck is good." Dean stared at him. "I heard that the patriarch of the Ryan family asked you to go outside the giant wall to find me. Why didn't you go? Sergei shrugged his shoulders and said, We don't know where you went. How can we search for you? I don't have a perception ability. You know, you can't blame me. Gwyneth, who was next to him, said, My magic marks ability doesn't have a perception ability. So there is no way to find you. Liar. At this time, Jean, who was standing in front of Dean, looked up and angrily said, I was going to go, but you two stopped me. You said that if Dean died then we would be free. Sergei's face slightly changed as he coldly said, Don't slander me. You need evidence. Yes. Gwyneth's eyes were cold as she stared at Jean. Dean slightly raised his hand to interrupt Jean, who was about to continue to argue. I know what you are thinking. I don't care what you think in your heart. But at least let me see your loyalty. Speaking up to here, he looked at Sergei and Gwyneth. Do you really think that if I die you will be free? I'm sorry to tell you that if I die then the umbrella over your head will be gone. You will die a more ugly death than me. You won't be imprisoned again. Sergei and Gwyneth's face slightly changed. Sergei opened his mouth. He is lying. We didn't. Dean raised his hand to interrupt him. I don't ask you to search for me outside the giant wall, but you should at least wait for me to come back. Maybe I will be dying when I return to the entrance of the giant wall. Wouldn't you be able to save my life if you were there? Sergei was startled and speechless for a moment. Dean softly said, I said that I will give each of you 3 chances. Sergei, you have used up 2 of them. I hope that you are on your own. Sergei's face slightly changed as he turned his head. Dean didn't pay attention to his attitude. His eyes fell on Nicholas, who was always respectful. Butler. I'm here. Nicholas quickly replied. Do you know that you have used up all 3 chances? Dean narrowed his eyes. There was a hint of killing intent in his voice. Young master, I don't understand. I remember that I offended you in the carriage on the way back. Now that I'm in your castle, I've always behaved myself. You can't misunderstand me because of my past actions. In front of you, I don't have the ability to turn over a new leaf. I've long since given up. Moreover, I'm already so old. Nicholas hurriedly tried to explain. Dean shook his head. I said that you have to listen to me and be loyal to me from the time I bailed you out. You can't have any bad intentions. Even if you have bad intentions, you can only think about it in your heart. Even if you do, then don't let me know. Unfortunately, your ability is too rough. To be honest, I'm very disappointed. I'm not disappointed that you betrayed me, but the process of betrayal. There are too many loopholes. It's hard to imagine how careless your previous master must have been to allow you to empty their treasury. Perhaps I've misjudged you. Nicholas was startled. Sergei and Gwyneth tilted their heads and looked at him. Sergei had a gloating smile on his face. He folded his arms and quietly watched the fight. This lowly one doesn't understand. Please speak frankly, young master. Nicotine came back to his senses and said firmly. Dean indifferently said, Why did you entrust the chef to inquire about my identity? What is your intention? Nicholas couldn't help but look at the chef. Master, he is slandering me. Dean glanced at him. Do you think that money can seal your mouth? Indeed, money is very useful in some cases. Unfortunately, you can only give him money. I can give him more money than you can give him. I can also give him life. Tell me, who's more important, your identity or my identity? I think that even a pig would know which side to stand on. Nicotine's expression immediately turned ugly. He lowered his head and said, Young master, I know I was wrong. I just wanted to serve you better. You don't have to say these words. Dean indifferently said, The 3rd betrayal was when you searched for my things in my room. The 4th betrayal was when you secretly sent a letter to the Melon Consortium to inform me that I was going to hunt outside the giant wall. Nicholas hurriedly said, It wasn't me. It really wasn't me. You can't slander me like that. Dean indifferently looked at him. You should be glad that I'm very busy right now. I don't have time to deal with you. I've said that I'll make those who betray me cry. Since you're restless at home, then the next time we go hunting, you will come with me." Nicotine's expression changed as he hastily said, "Young master, you can't do this to me. I can't accept this. I like to make people unwilling." "Master," Dean raised his hand to interrupt him. He waved for Alan to retreat. He glanced at Sergei and Gwyneth. "You should also get ready and have a good rest. We will go outside the giant wall in 2 days." He turned to Jean. "You stay at home and hire a few servants. Remember to pick carefully. Don't let other consortiums get the news and take the opportunity to send people in." Chapter 305. Dean looked at Nicholas. "Bring me the newspapers of the past few days." "Yes." Nicholas bowed his head and left in low spirit. After a moment, Nicholas took out a thick stack of newspapers and piled them on the table in front of Dean. Nicholas secretly glanced at Dean's expression. He couldn't see whether he was happy or angry. He forced a smile. "Master, these are the newspapers from the day you left until this morning. You just came back from the prison, so you haven't eaten yet. Should I get you something to eat first?" "No, I came back a long time ago. I just had dinner at the Ryan family," Dean indifferently said. Nicholas's eyes lit up. "Master, why didn't you contact us when you came back? We could have gone to the cleaners to pick you up." Dean glanced at him. "Do I need to tell you about my actions? If I didn't care about your bail money, and didn't want to bring back a waste, you wouldn't be able to speak now. Do you know that?" Nicholas's face changed. He didn't dare to probe anymore. "Go and rest." Dean took the newspapers and went back to his room. He read the newspapers in turn. There weren't many changes in the military. Barbarians had attacked several fortresses, but there wasn't a large-scale war. As for the financial groups, all of them were developing their main industries and consolidating their business dynasties. In addition to consolidating their businesses, they also allocated a portion of their resources to the military. Clearly, they were taking advantage of the current chaotic period of war and wanted to use military supplies to make some extra money. There wasn't much movement from the Temple of Elements, but on the way there was a sensational theory published by the lightning master Ivissa. Bioelectricity. There is the power of thunder in the body of a living creature. This must be the wealth of the god of light. If it can be guided, then it will produce a huge amount of power. Dean sneered as he glanced at the paper and the comments of all parties. The biomagnetic field had a great effect, but it needed to be used with the help of very advanced equipment. Moreover, it was far from what was written in the paper. "We haven't entered the microscopic level yet. So we don't know about electrons and molecules, which are the components of the world. The road to the future is very long. If we want to conquer the monsters outside the giant wall and step out of the giant wall, then we must have the power to sweep away the monsters. But this power is not something that can be achieved by relying on human strength. Even if we evolve to the extreme, we can be comparable to the monsters, but only a few individuals. Father said that technology belongs to the masses and will always serve the masses. Only when the masses have the power to hunt the monsters can we sweep away the monsters." Dean's eyes lit up as he put away the newspaper. Dean sat on the chair and pondered for a moment. He went to the wardrobe and opened the secret compartment. He pulled out a brick from the back of the secret compartment. There was a very small, C-shaped groove on the inside of the brick. He gently twisted the handle, and the wall next to him slowly rotated. A small dark compartment appeared. The space was very small, no more than 2 cubic meters. The super chip and the card reader were wrapped in different cloth. Even if someone found them, they wouldn't know how to use them. The card reader had fingerprint recognition. Dean took it out and sat on the bed to read the knowledge inside. The night passed. Dean put the card reader and the super chip back into the dark compartment. He also put the book he brought back into the dark compartment. He changed into clean clothes and went downstairs. He looked at Nicholas, who was waiting for him in the hall. Prepare the car and pack breakfast. I'll eat on the road. Nicholas was startled. What are you doing? I'm going to the temple. Dean looked at him and indifferently said, Oh, master, wait a moment. I'll go and prepare everything for you. Nicholas nodded and turned around to prepare. His humble expression quickly darkened, and a trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Tell Sergei to go to the place where I bought steel last time and order another batch of steel. The quantity will be the same as last time. Dean took the breakfast and went out. He looked back at Nicholas. If the steel doesn't arrive before I come back, then you and Sergei will be responsible for it. Yes. Nicholas smiled. The carriage slowly moved away. Dean lifted the curtain. Hurry up! Change the flag of the temple. The coachman was surprised but quickly complied. He inserted the flag of the temple on the carriage. He whipped the horses and galloped away. After a moment Dean arrived at the foot of the mountain where the headquarters of the Temple of Elements was located. The carriage went straight to the front of the temple under Dean's command. Dean jumped out of the carriage and glanced at the temple. Although it was early, but it was already 8 o'clock when he arrived. Many architects who lived in the headquarters of the temple had woken up and started to work. More than a dozen figures could be seen in the hall of the temple. Dean followed the stairs into the temple. He glanced around and found the trading desk. He quickly walked towards it. Hello, what can I do for you? There was a pretty girl behind the trading desk. She was holding a book called Basic Metal Theory Encyclopedia in her hand. She felt that someone was coming over. She looked up and saw the intermediate architect medal pinned on Dean's chest. There was a trace of polite smile on her face as she casually asked. Dean noticed that she also had a medal on her chest. It was an intermediate medal. He was surprised as the girl's age was almost the same as his. He didn't expect that she would be an intermediate architect. This shock only lasted for a moment. He quickly asked, Is there a cage that's harder than the others? The girl slightly frowned. We only sell items here. If you want to buy a cage, you can go outside and buy it. There are a lot of them in the military. I want a very strong cage. An ordinary cage won't do. What is the hardest metal you have here? Dean asked. The girl indifferently replied, We don't have a cage, but the hardest metal we have is tungsten steel. It is a kind of alloy. You can entrust a metal architect to build a cage for you or entrust me. Of course there will be a lot of fees. Tungsten steel? Dean was startled. He didn't expect that the alchemy department would be able to refine tungsten steel. The last time he reminded Nightingale about aluminum alloy, the concept of alloy didn't appear in metal smelting at that time. If the concept of alloy was developed after the introduction of Nightingale's alloy products into the market, then in just a few years they had smelted tungsten steel. Such development was simply amazing. All right, tungsten steel. Dean decided that the cage made of tungsten steel wouldn't be able to break free from the strength of the small splitter. If the cage was big enough and the steel pipe was thick enough, then even the great splitter wouldn't be able to break free. Chapter 306. How much is the price? Dean asked. The girl's tone was cold as she saw that Dean didn't know. Tungsten steel is a commercial invention. You can buy it with points or gold coins. If you buy it with points, then it will be 10 kilograms. If you buy it with gold coins, then it will be 7 gold coins for 10 kilograms. If you don't buy it, then it will be 10 gold coins for 10 kilograms. You are an intermediate architect, so I will give you a 30% discount. If you are a senior architect, then 50% discount. Dean was a bit surprised. 10 gold coins for 10 kilograms? This tungsten steel is almost the same price as copper coins. Of course it is a precious metal alloy, so it is as expensive as copper coins. The girl's expression became indifferent as she saw his reaction. Please leave if you don't want to buy it. Dudian pondered. The price of metals in this world was generally more valuable than the metals in the old era. The first reason was that the refining process was very basic, which led to the scarcity of metals. The second reason was that the war outside the fortress and the hunting outside the giant wall required top-grade steel to make weapons and armors. This had greatly increased the price of top-grade steel. I'll buy it. Give me 2,000 kilograms first, Dudian said to the girl after thinking for a moment. The girl who sat back on the chair was surprised. She looked up at Dudian and saw the serious look on the boy's face. She got up again and frowned. 2,000 kilograms? Do you want to buy it with points or gold coins? Gold coins, Dudian replied. He had accumulated enough points to get a senior architect medal after the emergence of the military crossbow. He didn't want to waste them here. There was a trace of relief in the girl's eyes as she indifferently said, "Gold coins are limited to 1,000 kilograms per person per day. There is no limit for points." Dudian was surprised. The next moment he understood that the temple had such a system. It was to prevent the temple's personnel from colluding with wealthy businessmen outside to sell the temple's goods at a discounted price. "All right, 1,000 kilograms," Dean agreed. He was going to look for Bernard and ask him to help him buy 1,000 kilograms. The girl looked at him. "Pay the money first. I'll submit your exchange order. Fill in the address and someone will help you send it to your place." "All right." Dean pulled out the wallet sewn from the leather armor and took out 7 gold notes. The words 100 were engraved on them. All of them were 100-digit gold coins. The girl casually glanced at it, and suddenly her eyes widened. Her breathing became a little short. She could not help but ask, What is that?" She raised her hand and pointed to a silver coin in Dudian's wallet. Dean was surprised. He took out the epoch medal and put it into his pocket. Nothing. He put the wallet into his pocket. The girl had already seen it when he took it out. Her eyes widened and she looked at the boy in front of her in shock. Her brain was buzzing, and several pieces of information were quickly put together in her mind. Would attribute intermediate oracle, the youngest in history. She took a deep breath and looked up and down at Dean. Are you Mr. Dean?" There was a trace of helplessness in Dean's heart. He was in a hurry and didn't want to be entangled. He took out the order in front of her and wrote his name and the location of his castle. He handed the order to her. "I am in urgent need of this batch of things. Please help me deliver it quickly." The girl's eyes moved down to the order. She saw the name on the signature of the order. She was pleasantly surprised. "Mr. Dean, I didn't recognize you before. I'm sorry. You are the winner of the epoch medal. You can enjoy the same treatment as the masters. You only need to pay a 10% discount." She took out 6 gold notes and handed them back to Dean. Dean didn't expect the epoch medal to have such benefits. Although hundreds of gold coins were a trivial matter for him, he took them and asked, "Can I buy 2,000 kilograms at a time?" "Yes, of course," the girl quickly said. "You can enjoy the same treatment as the masters in this regard. The upper limit is 10,000 kilograms. Dean smiled. "Then give me 10,000 kilograms. Then he took out his wallet and took out 3 gold notes. He handed them to her along with the other 6 in his hand. The girl was stunned as she looked at the gold notes. She wasn't surprised by the amount of money. She didn't expect that Dean, who was a wood element architect, would buy 10,000 kilograms of tungsten steel. She couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Dean, are you buying so much tungsten steel for research?" She thought that Dean was an architect who was helping rich businessmen to resell their tungsten steel. She had seen a lot of architects like Dean. Most of the architects in the temple were from middle-class families in the commercial district. They weren't rich, but they weren't poor either. There was no problem for them to go to school. But to step into the field of research would require a lot of money. But for people like Dean, she believed that he wouldn't be short of money. He was richer than 10 rich businessmen. The price of a military crossbow could make a group of nobles jealous. Dean vaguely replied, "Almost." The girl couldn't help but ask, "Are you going to join us?" Dean replied, "We will talk about this later. I hope you can help me deliver the tungsten steel as soon as possible." "Thank you." The girl's eyes flashed with a hint of intelligence. "You said you wanted to use tungsten steel to make a cage, right? Why don't I help you? I can be your assistant." If it was before, she would have directly recommended Dean to build it. But now she knew Dean's identity and thought that he wanted to build a unique cage. So she was willing to join as an assistant. She could take the opportunity to observe Dean's experiment. After all, Dean's military crossbow wasn't only about wood element but also about metal element such as the weight of the arrowhead, structure, and so on. Dean thought for a moment. "All right, but I don't have a forging furnace." "It's okay. I have one," the girl said. "You can go to my room to build." Dean thought for a moment. "All right then, I'll trouble you. I'll pay for it." He could see that the girl had come here as a part-time job. He estimated that she was in a financial situation. The girl replied, "No need. I'm just an assistant. It's rare for me to watch you try out your new invention. How can I dare to ask for money?" "It's nothing," Dean casually replied. He didn't want to owe a favor as it was the most difficult thing to return. The girl no longer refused. In fact, she was short of money. Suddenly a surprised voice echoed from the side. The girl and Dean looked at the direction of the voice. The girl was curious while Dean knew that the voice was directed at him. 3 people slowly walked over. The one in the lead was a handsome young man with blonde hair and blue eyes. His beautiful golden hair showed his identity, a nobleman. Behind this young man were 2 other young men. One of them was older, about 27 or 28 years old, and had a gentle appearance. The other had a face full of smiles, and it was obvious that he was a mischievous person. Both of them had brown hair, and they were most likely commoners. "Isn't this Dean?" The blond youth came over with a surprised look on his face. Dean glanced at him and felt that there was a hidden knife in his smile. There was a trace of malicious intent in his eyes. As a person who could get along with an old fox like Old Foulin, his ability to read people wasn't comparable to his peers. Dean glanced at the other's robe. There was an orchid pattern on it. Was he from the Milan family? Dean's eyes lit up as he smiled. "Hello. Like I said, Mr. Dew is different from other geniuses. He is not the kind of person who becomes arrogant and complacent just because he has some achievement. Those people in the newspaper are too irresponsible." The blond young man was flattered and said humbly. Dudian smiled. In the end, he was from an aristocratic family. His skills were more ruthless than flattery. Since he knew that he wasn't that kind of person, but he still put forward those commendatory words. The purpose was obvious. If it was someone else, he could listen to it. But the Milan family was the mainstay of the Mel Consortium. It was impossible that they didn't know the relationship with him. There are always some people in this world who like to say irresponsible words. After all, the pain isn't on them. Dean faintly smiled. The blond youth nodded. Yes, they won't say such useless words when the pain is on them. Dean shook his head. They will say things like, "Please let me go." Chapter 307. Mr. Dean is really humorous. The blond youth laughed twice. I heard that Mr. Dean is not only an architect but also a hunter. His rank is the same as an architect's, intermediate rank. Mr. Dean is really a genius. You have 2 jobs but you still have outstanding achievement. You must have had a great harvest when you went hunting outside the giant wall, right? Hunter? The girl next to him was startled. She looked up and down at Dean. There was tension and scruples on her face. Dean faintly looked at the youth, Who told you that I went outside the giant wall? The blond youth laughed. I read it in the newspaper. It seems that it was misinformation. Newspapers are getting more and more unprofessional. It's not that the newspaper is unprofessional, but there are too many fools. Dean said in an indifferent tone. There is an old saying that rumors stop with the wise. I believe that you should have heard of it. After all, your Milan family is a great aristocratic family. Everyone in the family is a good person. You should understand this shallow knowledge. The blond youth's face slightly changed. Yes, you are right. I didn't teach you a lesson. Dean indifferently smiled. It was just an exchange. How can you say that I am teaching you a lesson? The blond youth's expression changed. He lowered his head and said, You're right. I misunderstood. It's easy for you to misunderstand things. The newspaper misunderstood me. You misunderstood me when I communicated with you. It's easy to make mistakes and offend people. If it's spread out, people will laugh at you. Fortunately, you met me today. I'm very tight-lipped and will never spread it. Dean coldly said. The golden-haired youth's expression changed slightly. He forced a smile and said, Thank you. Dean didn't look at the blond youth as he looked at the girl. When will the materials arrive? The girl responded, It will take at least 2 hours. All right, let's go to your room and prepare the tools. Is that okay? Dean asked. He was very anxious about this matter. The longer the splitter was, the more likely it would stir up trouble and be arrested by the Holy Church. All right, I have no problem. The girl immediately replied. The blond youth's eyes flashed as he heard their words. There was a look of surprise on his face. Mr. Dean, are you going to make an invention? I didn't see your shadow in the temple, so I thought you went outside the giant wall. Dean indifferently said, You don't have to repeatedly mention the Great Wall. Do you think I would go there with my identity? Are you trying to humiliate me? The golden-haired youth didn't expect this youth to be so sharp with his words. His expression changed as he said, I don't dare. I didn't mean to offend you. Please forgive me. Dean said to the girl, Lead the way. Well, please wait a moment. I'll send your order to the higher-ups first. She turned around and ran into the room behind the trading desk. Not long after, she returned with a mediocre-looking young man. I'm leaving. I'll leave this place to you. The girl giggled at the young man. The young man said blankly, All right. The girl came in front of Dean. Shall we go? Dean nodded and motioned her to lead the way. The blond youth saw that Dean completely ignored him. There was a trace of anger in his eyes, but he tried to restrain himself. After the blond youth left the temple with the girl, he put away the modest smile on his face. His face was expressionless as he clenched his fists in his sleeves. Master Kedon, should we find someone to teach him a lesson? Break one of his arms while no one is around. A brown-haired youth whispered in the youth's ear. The blond youth looked at him and said in a cold voice, Didn't you hear what I just said? This kid is not only an architect but also an intermediate hunter. You want to find someone to teach him a lesson? There are less than 50 people in the entire commercial district who can teach him a lesson. None of them are people we can invite. What are you going to do to teach him a lesson? So powerful? The brown-haired youth was surprised. The blond youth snorted. The monsters that were brought back from outside the giant wall were killed by these monsters. They are all monsters. What do you know? You are a frog at the bottom of the well. The brown-haired youth's face changed. He scratched his head and forced a smile. You are teaching me a lesson. Another brown-haired youth with a gentler appearance said, Young master, after all, he is the winner of the epic medal. In the near future, sooner or later, he will step into the senior oracle, and may even become a master. Let's not provoke such a person. The blond youth indifferently said, I have already provoked him. Do you think I would be stupid enough to come and provoke him? Why would I set up such a terrifying enemy? The two youth looked at each other in confusion. The blond youth didn't explain anything to them. It was normal for civilians to not understand the struggle between nobles. Even if they saw the newspaper, they didn't understand the source and purpose of the newspaper. They didn't understand the hostility and attacks behind it. Moreover, he disdained to talk about these things to civilians. Dean followed the girl out of the temple. "Hey, isn't that Dean? Is that the genius Dean? The one who won the epic medal?" At the moment it was 8 or 9 o'clock. There were a lot of architects who came out to exercise outside the temple. They were surprised to see Dean walking side by side with the girl. Only a few of them had strong self-esteem and didn't want to go over to watch. The girl was surprised to see the reaction of these people. She didn't expect that Dean's influence would be so strong. Dean was a bit distressed. He forced a smile and greeted these people. He knew that now was the time when his fame was at its peak. His every move would be on the news. The Melon Consortium didn't dare to attack his identity as an architect in order to avoid angering the Holy Church. So they chose to use his hunter identity to pull down his influence and glorious image. If he used his identity as an architect to do something inappropriate, then it would inevitably become a gap for the Melon Consortium to attack. Although this kind of attack could only use soft attacks such as newspapers, but the damage caused was more severe than any hard sword stabbing. After all, a person's mouth was the most terrible weapon in the world. Dean and the girl left in a hurry after politely declining the questions of many people. Dean covered his face with his sleeves after walking for a while. Although it looked a bit strange, but at least it didn't delay the journey. After a moment, the two arrived at the girl's castle. "This way." The girl led the way in front. Chapter 308. Following the shady path in the castle, they came to a tower. The girl opened the door and said, "Please, my artifact room is on the 2nd floor." Dean nodded. Both of them entered the tower and went to the girl's room on the 2nd floor. The size of the room was the same as Dean's room, but the furnishings were different. There were metal materials, metal shelves, and several small metal furnaces. There were also various metal container models. There was a bookcase near the window. There were all kinds of metal faction books. There were Metal Faction Encyclopedia, Basic Mystery of Metal Element, Metal Conflict, and so on. Dean looked at the girl. "Do you have a carving knife? I'll carve the mold first." The girl was surprised. "Aren't you going to make a new cage? The mold should be very big. I have a saw." "Carving knife is enough," Dean said. "Your door is too small. I can only forge the steel columns and transport them back to my castle for the final welding." The girl was startled. "That's true." There was a trace of disappointment in his eyes. He thought that he would be able to witness the process of Dean's new invention. He didn't expect that he would only be able to see half of it. However, everyone's invention was top secret. There was no way to defend it if it was plagiarized before it was registered in the temple. Dean noticed the disappointment on her face but didn't care. He didn't need to show her the splitter's cage, since they weren't related. The girl found the carving knife and handed it to Dean. Dean took the wooden bar from the shelf, held the knife in his right hand, and quickly cut it. The blade was not too sharp, but with his great strength, he easily chiseled a straight circular mark on the wooden bar. "Why didn't you draw the lines first?" The girl was surprised as she saw Dean start. She saw that Dean's carving knife was straight without the slightest crookedness. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. She thought of Dean's identity as a wood architect. She couldn't help but sigh. There were rumors that the boy relied on luck, but his proficiency in chiseling models was difficult to achieve without countless practice. Dean chiseled out some models of different length. He had already conceived the shape of the splitter's cage in his mind. The girl quietly watched from the side. She observed the youth's fingers from the side. She saw his slender fingers chiseling through the model as if he was cutting tofu. There wasn't the slightest bit of strain on his fingers. He was calm and graceful as if he was painting. She looked at him for a moment and suddenly said, Kedden had said that you are a hunter. Is that true? Are you also a civilian? Dean didn't raise his head. Yes. His black hair proved his identity. Although there were nobles who had hair colors other than gold, but there were very few of them. The girl couldn't help but look up at his cheek. There was a trace of fear in her eyes. She whispered, Hunters often deal with monsters. They are very bad people. Moreover, they are grumpy and arrogant. You seem to be very different from other hunters. Dudian indifferently said, The hunters I have seen are very modest, wise, and cautious. The girl carefully asked, Are you still a hunter? Dean's hand paused for a moment. He was silent for 0.2 seconds. I haven't done it for a long time. Really? The girl's eyes lit up and she said in surprise, That's great. Dean was silent as he quickly carved the model. While his left hand was practicing carving, his right hand's control had also increased a lot. Even if he was copying fine works of art, he could carve 70%, not to mention a rough model like the cage. All the models were finished after a moment. Dean looked for a chair to sit down and rest. He was thinking about other things as he waited for the materials to arrive. Knock. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. The girl who wanted to talk to Dean was surprised. She opened the door and indifferently said, What are you doing here? Ellen, I came to see you. A young man's voice came from outside. Can I come in to talk? No. The girl flatly refused. Her attitude was not polite. It seemed that both of them had some unpleasant things. The young man said, Ellen, I am also a guest. Why are you treating me like this? You are not my guest. Ellen indifferently said, I know what you are going to do. Don't have any ideas about me. The young man was angry as he saw her speak so bluntly. I heard that you have brought back a man. Is it true? Ellen coldly said, What does it have to do with you? You are one of my people. Of course it has something to do with me. The youth's voice was filled with anger. He pushed open the door and saw Dean sitting next to the bookshelf in the room. Dean was sitting next to the bookshelf and casually taking out various books. His eyes turned red. He pushed away Ellen's arm and stepped forward. Hey boy, who are you? Get out here. Tungsten gold element. Dean frowned as he heard the voice behind him. He turned around and looked at the person. It was a young man with light blonde hair. His appearance was above average. He was not handsome but not ugly. Judging from the material of his clothes and hair color, he should be a noble. But his hair color was diluted. He was either an aristocrat from the commercial district where the climate was relatively hot, so the aristocrats generally had light blonde hair, or he was a declining aristocrat. His father or ancestors had intermarried with civilians. With just a glance, Dean was able to see through the identity of the other party. This was not eyesight but experience. Although I don't know what your relationship is, but you better not yell at me. Dean indifferently said. The anger on the young man's face didn't diminish as he saw Dean's appearance. Apparently he didn't recognize Dean's identity. He was so angry that he laughed. He determined that Dean was a civilian from his hair color. Although it was extremely rare to see a civilian with pure black hair, but it was not much different from those brown hair pariahs. He coldly said, I'll say it again. Get out of here. In addition to the hair color, he also noticed the architect medal on Dean's chest. Wood element? Intermediate? What the hell was that? Shut up. Ellen, who was standing next to him, hurriedly scolded him. Apologize to Mr. Dean. He is my guest. You, as a noble, if you continue to be so barbaric, I will go to the shrine and report you for interfering with my research. Research? I think it is a research between a man and a woman. The young man's face turned red as he saw Ellen defend Dean. Ellen's eyes widened as her face turned red. Her voice trembled as she said, You say it again." The young man knew that he had said it when he saw her appearance. There was a trace of regret in his heart. But as he thought that there was an outsider sitting in front of him, the regret was replaced by anger. He shouted at Dean, "Brat, get out of here!" Dean looked at him, slowly closed the book, and put it on the table next to him. Bang! Just as she put the book down, her body flashed out like a phantom. In the next moment, a gray figure suddenly flew out from beside Lin and collided with the door behind her with a bang. It was the young man from before. Dean took the second step and appeared in front of the young man who had fallen to the ground. He slapped the young man's face. The young man who was about to get up fell to the ground. The force of the slap was heavy. A few drops of blood splashed out on the spot, and 2 teeth covered with yellow dirt fell to the ground. "You shouldn't continue to be presumptuous when I warned you," Dean slowly said. The young man was in pain. He turned to look at Dean. From this angle, he could see Ellen, who was behind Dean's shoulder. It made him realize how embarrassed he was at the moment. He roared and rushed towards Dean. Dean stood up and kicked him in the chest. He didn't look at him again. He turned to Ellen. "You deal with this matter yourself. I attacked him because he offended me. Deal with your matters by yourself. Don't disturb me." He turned back to the chair and picked up the book on the table to continue to read, as if nothing had happened. Ellen was startled. She couldn't help but show a trace of horror on her face. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. She didn't expect that the young man who knew simple fighting and horsemanship would be defeated by Dean in an instant. Was this the power of a hunter? Was this the modesty of a hunter? At this time, she heard moaning outside the door. She reacted and hurried out. After all, the young man was a noble. She couldn't afford to offend him. The young man climbed up from the outside and saw Ellen running out. He felt that his dignity was gone. He rushed to the door and roared, "I'm going to kill you!" "Don't!" Ellen hurriedly reached out to block the door. Chapter 309. The young man and Ellen turned their heads at the same time. The one who spoke was a fair-skinned young man, elegant and handsome. He wore a pure white robe, but what was different from an ordinary robe was that there were 2 black dragons embroidered on his shoulders. The youth who was about to get angry saw the 2 black dragons. His face slightly changed. "Isn't he Wood Element? How can he be here?" "You are looking for the wrong place." "No," Ellen quickly replied. "Mr. Dean is here. What do you want from him?" The youth was startled as he heard Ellen's words. Suddenly, he remembered the medal on the chest of the youth who was sitting on the chair. Wood Element Intermediate Level. Wasn't the legendary genius Dean also at the intermediate level of Wood Element? He took a deep breath as his face turned ugly. "Did you say that person is Dean?" Ellen looked at him and sighed. "Yes, you are always like this. You can't change your impulsive character." The youth clenched his teeth. "I won't give up on you even if he is Dean. Although I'm not as good as him, but I'm a noble and he is just a civilian. I know more than him in other aspects." Ellen was startled. "I'm sorry." The youth apologetically interrupted the two. "Can you take me to see Mr. Dean? My teacher asked me to pass a message to him." There was a trace of shock in Ellen's eyes. "Your teacher? Master Black Dragon is looking for him?" The youth was stunned. He felt that he had been slapped in the face. No matter how many things he knew, how could he be compared with a master? Even though he was a noble, he had never had the chance to interact with a great master, just like the Cloud Bird and the Earth Dragon. Although the latter was a commoner, his status was higher than many nobles, and now there was even a great master looking for him. "Yes." The youth smiled and nodded. Ellen said, "Please come in, he is inside." She moved aside to let the youth in. Dean, who was sitting on the chair and reading the book, heard the words outside the door. There was a trace of surprise in his eyes. He knew about the names and positions of some masters when he first entered the temple. For example, Ivissa was a master of lightning. Ivissa was nicknamed Hungry Thunder because he used lightning research as food. He would starve if he didn't eat for a day. Master Black Dragon, whose real name was Manta, was an earth element master. He was good at coal research. Therefore he got the title Black Dragon. Soon, the fair young man entered the god relic room under Ellen's lead, and the young man who was kicked out earlier followed behind. "Hello, Mr. Dean." The youth's eyes lit up as he saw Dean sitting on the chair. "My name is Dirya. My teacher Manta is looking for you to go to the Parliament of Gods." Parliament of Gods? Dudian was startled as his eyes lit up. Ellen and the youth were startled. Dirya smiled. "The Parliament of Gods is mainly about you. My teacher told you not to be nervous. It's not a big deal. The meeting will be held at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please be sure to go." Dean's face calmed down. "I'll go." The youth smiled. "Then I'll go back first." He bid farewell to Dudian, Ellen and the youth and went out of the door. Ellen and the youth recovered. Ellen was shocked as she looked at Dean. The meetings of the Temple of Gods were held to discuss important matters related to the temple. Historically, only master-level characters were able to enter the Temple of Gods. Moreover, not all masters were able to participate in the meetings of the Temple of Gods. This showed the importance of the Temple of Gods. Dean was probably the first person with the lowest rank to enter the Temple of Gods. The youth's face was complex as he whispered to Dean, "Mr. Dean, I'm sorry. I offended you." After saying that, he lowered his head in humiliation. He was unwilling to apologize, and even more unwilling to apologize to another person in front of the person he loved. However, he realized that the youth sitting in front of him, who was only a few years younger than him, had the power to easily destroy his family. He did not dare to offend him. Ellen was shocked as she heard the youth's words. She had been in contact with the youth for a long time. She didn't expect such an arrogant person to apologize. Moreover, he was a noble. She had never seen a noble bow to a commoner. Dean indifferently said, "It's nothing. I've already taken back the things that offended me. Don't bother me again. Go." The youth's face changed. He squeezed out a smile as he turned to leave. Dean looked at Ellen. "The materials should be delivered soon. Go and have a look." Ellen nodded and instinctively walked out. She suddenly realized that she wasn't Dean's servant. She quickly walked out of the door. "The Parliament of Gods wants to discuss about me? They probably want me to stop being a hunter. I didn't expect that the public opinion outside could even affect the temple. But to convene a meeting for such a trivial matter, they really think highly of me." Dean smiled as he put away the book. He got up and went to the furnace. He turned on the furnace and heated it up. The smell of tungsten steel had drifted over from outside. The tungsten steel cage should be ready before sunset. He could take advantage of the night to go out and look for the splitter. Dean wouldn't dare to go out at night if he was outside the giant wall. But he didn't care so much in the radiation zone. Although there were cases of senior hunters who were bitten to death by mutant monsters on their way to the outside of the giant wall. But after all, it was a big event that happened once in a few decades. The probability of encountering such an event was very low. Ellen and several civilian laborers came to the god's tools room. The latter held some tungsten steel materials and sent them to the room. "Put it here." Dean pointed to a place. Several laborers carefully put down the tungsten steel materials. Ellen was surprised when she saw that Dean was heating the furnace. "You are really impatient. Fortunately, they have delivered it." She came to another furnace. "I'll help you." "All right." Dean didn't refuse. The tungsten steel cage wasn't an innovative invention. Even a primary metal architect could make it. As time passed, a large number of tungsten steel materials were poured into the mold. They were cast into a wrist-thick steel column. The workers carried them to the carriage and transported them to Dean's castle. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dean had smelted 3,000 kilograms of materials and refined them into hundreds of tungsten steel pillars. In addition, there were 8 wrist-thick curved hooks. All these things were entrusted to the public servants of the temple to transport to his castle. Chapter 310. The remaining 7,000 kilograms of tungsten steel had been sent to the castle by the time Dean returned to the castle. Dean told Nicholas to arrange people to put the tungsten steel materials in the waste field behind the castle. As for the 3,000 kilograms of tungsten steel cylinder and the tungsten steel hook, they were all piled up on the training ground next to the waste field. Dean asked Sergei and Jean to move the smelting furnace from the basement to the training ground. It was a small smelting furnace. It was about 3 meters high. He bought it from the market for more than 10 gold coins. Although 10 gold coins wasn't worth mentioning for him, but it was equivalent to 7 or 8 years of savings for civilians. Dean taught Sergei how to heat the furnace. He asked Nicholas to buy a batch of coal as fuel. In the era of electricity, steel welding was done by iron and fire. "Master, why do you want to make such a big cage?" Jean asked curiously as he saw the length of the tungsten steel. Dean poured molten iron into the welded parts of the tungsten steel. "I'm going to hunt monsters outside the giant wall. I'm going to use it as a trap." Sergei laughed. "You are willing to spend a lot of money. The cost of these things isn't small." Dean didn't reply as he focused on welding. The tungsten steel cage was finally formed after an hour. It was a square and 6 meters long. Considering the terrifying growth rate of Splitter, Dean deliberately made it twice as tall as Splitter. It was enough for a short period of time. Dean engraved the model of the chain. He melted the steel in the furnace. After a moment, 8 thick tungsten steel chains came out of the furnace. White smoke billowed out of the cold water. After cooling down, he connected one end of the chain to the tungsten steel hook and the other end to the cage. In the blink of an eye, all 8 directions of the cage were connected to the tungsten steel hook and the tungsten steel chain. Sergei and others were amazed as they saw the shape of the cage. At the same time, they were curious about the monster that Dean was going to hunt. Dean called the carriages. The carriages were prohibited from entering the main streets of the commercial district. They could only travel in the suburbs of the commercial district. There were different sizes of carriages. The largest one was an adult mammoth carriage. It was 7 to 8 meters high. Sound horn mammoth was a domesticated animal. It was used by humans like horses. Its fierce nature had been tamed and erased from generation to generation. It rarely attacked people. Nevertheless, the sound horn mammoth carriage was still prohibited from entering the main district. The first reason was that it would get out of control and trample on pedestrians. The second reason was that it was easy to damage the street surface. Dean asked Gwyneth and Sergei to move the cage to the carriage. He used more than 10 rough ropes to fix the cage and cover it with a huge black cloth. At the moment the sun was setting and the sky was dusk. Dean didn't bring Sergei and the others with him this time. He sat alone in the sound horn carriage and left the castle. The coachman was a middle-aged man in his 30s. He was wearing strange clothes. He wasn't holding a whip but a flute in his hand. He was gently playing the melodious flute along the way. Dean asked and found out that the inside of the sound horn mammoth was hollow. It had a strong sound recognition ability. The main way to control it was through the flute. Dean chatted with the coachman. Although the latter was just a small coachman, but he benefited a lot. The sound horn carriage arrived at the fort by nightfall. "Mr. Dean, this is as far as I can go." The coachman stopped playing the flute and said to Dean. Dean nodded. It was too easy for the sound horn mammoth to leave footprints outside the fort. Barbarians would be able to track it. Moreover, it was easy to fall into the hands of the mutated monsters in the radiation zone. After hundreds of years of breeding, this kind of mutated creature had lost its fierceness and attack ability. It would become the biggest piece of moving meat. Dean jumped out of the carriage, took out his silver eagle hunting medal, and handed it over to her. The guard checked the medal and returned it to him. He looked at the black cloth on the carriage. "What's inside?" "Hunting tools." Dean returned to the carriage. He lifted the black cloth and dragged the tungsten steel cage from the carriage. He put it on the ground. The weight of 3,000 kilograms was a bit strenuous for him to carry. The coachman was completely stunned as he saw Dean lift such a huge cage by himself. The guard next to him was also surprised. He looked at Dean vigilantly. There was a deep fear in his eyes. "Please." Dean grabbed the 2 tungsten steel columns in the middle of the cage and lifted them onto his back. He walked towards the darkness outside the fort. In the blink of an eye, Dean was more than a kilometer away from the fort. He sniffed with his nose to catch the various smells that were blowing in the wind. After more than an hour, Dean finally smelled a familiar smell. It was the smell of Splitter. His eyes lit up as he lifted the cage and walked towards the direction of the smell. It didn't take long for the smell to become stronger in front of him. Most likely the Splitter was there. He stopped and threw the cage on the ground. He shook his sore and stiff hands and took out the hunter's blood that he had scraped from his body last time. He smeared it on the hunter's armor on his shoulder. The blood had hardened and the smell was weak. He wrapped it with gauze to prevent the blood shell from falling off the armor. After everything was ready, Dean lifted the cage and continued to walk towards the hunter's location. Many mutated beasts in the radiation zone had come out to hunt in the darkness. In just a few miles, Dean encountered several strange mutant beasts, but they were easily killed by him. Huh! Dean suddenly smelled the scent of the hunter, and it was getting stronger and stronger. He immediately knew that the hunter had noticed him and was approaching him. His eyes were slightly cold, and there was a trace of nervousness in his heart, but more excitement. He put the iron cage on the ground and waited for the hunter to come. After a moment there was a rustling sound in the darkness. A huge shadow jumped out of the cage. It was nearly 4 meters tall. Its whole body looked like a ferocious seaweed. All of its limbs were scythes or sharp blades. Every part of its body was a weapon for attack. This terrifying body structure caused people to tremble in fear. There was a trace of surprise in Dean's heart when he saw it. He didn't expect that in less than a day, the little guy's size seemed to have grown a bit. Wasn't this growth rate too fast? Splitter stood in front of the cage. There were 2 emerald eyes in the middle of its body. It was staring at Dean. Dean was nervous as he couldn't figure out the behavior of the monster. He could only hide in the cage if it attacked him. As time passed, Splitter slowly moved around the tungsten steel cage. Dean was relieved as he saw this. He grabbed the tungsten steel cage and dragged it towards the abandoned building. Although he could lock Splitter in the cage, but he may not be able to drag the tungsten steel cage and its weight. It was inevitable that people would notice it if it was imprisoned in the wilderness. The abandoned building was an excellent hiding place. Splitter was surprised as it saw the cage being dragged. It retreated a few steps but quickly reacted. It looked at the cage from behind. From time to time it would raise its scythe arm and cut the cage. Dean was a bit scared as he heard the clanking sound. In the darkness of the night, clouds of radiation covered the starry sky. As the black snow season approached, there were more clouds in the sky, and the color was darker. The radiation particles were mixed within, firmly blocking the moonlight and starlight. The ground was pitch black without light. Dean was glad that he had night vision. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to escape from Splitter's cave in the era of electric light. He would have become the rations of the first small Splitter. Dean smelled a lot of mutant beasts along the way, but they seemed to be aware of Splitter's smell and ran far away. There were also some mutant beasts that lurked in the same place and didn't move. It didn't take long for Dean to find the previous mountain plain. He dragged the cage to the abandoned building. He grabbed the chain of the cage and slowly put the cage into the basement. Then he jumped on the cage and dragged it to a place in the basement. The passage was too narrow for the cage to pass through, so it could only be placed here. Dean pierced the tungsten steel hook of the chain into the ground. The ground was cement and had long been soaked in moisture. Instead of relying on the strength of the cement, he returned to the basement and cut off some trees in the woods near the entrance of the building. He cut off the branches, sharpened the bottom, and made a few wooden frames. Then he fixed the 4 parts of the wooden frame with wood and used the hook to scoop out the soil. He dug a deep pit and buried the wooden frame in it. Splitter stayed next to him. From time to time it would swing its scythe arm on the tungsten steel cage to hone its weapon. A moment later, Dean dug a 7 or 8 meters deep pit in the ground. He hooked the crooked hook to the wooden frame and buried it from the 4 corners. Each corner had 2 chains. After that, he buried the soil. He held the thick tree trunk and pedaled it flat. Then he found some stones and pressed them on the soil. Dean was tired and sweaty after finishing these fixed jobs. Most of the night had passed and it was around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. He looked at Splitter, who was lying on the ground and sleeping soundly. He let out a sigh of relief and opened the tungsten steel cage. He wiped a bit of blood from the gauze on his shoulder and sprinkled it into the cage. Then, he jumped out of the basement and went back upstairs. Soon, he found a snake hole in the corner of the wall that had been soaked in the rain. He stabbed the hole with a dagger and pulled out 2 thick mutant earth snakes from inside. Splitter's eyes were wide open. Dean quickly cut them off and carried them back to the basement. Perhaps it was because of the smell of blood, but Splitter woke up. It gently moved and climbed up. It stared at Dean. Dean threw 1 mutant snake in front of Splitter and the other into the tungsten steel cage. Splitter didn't take any precautions. It went back into the cage after it finished eating the mutant snake in front of it. It picked up the other mutant snake and ate it. Clang! The tungsten steel cylinder fell from the top of the cage. Dean, who was waiting next to the cage, made a move. He put the hook on the bottom of the tungsten steel cylinder and locked it tightly. Splitter looked back as it heard the sound. It saw that the cage was sealed. It roared in a low voice and waved its scythe arm to cut the cage. Dean heard its anxious cry and slowly retreated. At the same time, he paid attention to the place where it cut the tungsten steel cylinder. There were only shallow scratches. His heart was relieved and his face showed a smile. He didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. He thought it would take a lot of effort, but now it was done in one night. Squeak! Splitter screamed impatiently. It attacked the tungsten steel cage with all its might, but it didn't have any effect. Its body struggled fiercely inside the cage, causing the cage to shake slightly. The 4 corners of the cage were stretched taut, shaking slightly, causing the soil on the ground to crack slightly. Dean frowned as he saw the scene. He put away the plasma shell on his shoulder and left the basement. After a moment he came back again with a boulder that weighed more than 1,000 pounds. Bang! He pressed the boulder on the ground where the chains were connected. Splitter was still violently struggling. The other 3 chains were still shaking violently, but the 2 chains that were pressed by the boulder were motionless. Dean went out again and brought back another boulder. He pressed it on the other corner of the cage. He went back and forth a few times until the 4 corners were pressed by the boulder. Dean had an inexplicable feeling as he saw Splitter roaring anxiously. It seemed that Splitter was asking for help. He couldn't help but sigh as he turned away. He found some leaves to cover the entrance of the basement. He followed the smell and went to the wilderness to hunt several mutant beasts. He brought them back to the basement and threw them into Splitter's cage. Splitter saw the food as it stopped hitting the cage. It lowered its head and ate the food. It didn't take long for several mutant beasts to be eaten by it. It roared as if it had recovered its strength. It continued to hit the cage. Dean turned and left the basement. He looked at the sky outside. There was a touch of dawn. He didn't expect the night to pass so fast. He thought of today's meeting with the Council of Gods. His eyes flashed with a cold light. He returned to the fort along the original path. This time he was going to sneak into the city. If he was going to enter the city, then he would have to show the certificate issued by Jing Shou as a hunter, regardless of whether he had been to the giant wall or not. Dean didn't return to the castle. He took off the hunter's armor and went to a pub to eat and drink. He washed his hands and left. He rented a carriage and went to the Temple of Elements. Fortunately, he was prepared. He didn't wear underwear under the hunter's armor but a coat. The carriage arrived at the mountain after a few hours. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. Chapter 3:11. Hello, Mr. Dean. Hello, Mr. Dean. Dean met other architects in the castle when he came out of the God Relic Tower. There were old and young architects. They took the initiative to greet Dean as soon as they saw him. Dean was already a celebrity in this castle. Everyone knew that this young man would become a senior architect in the future after the military crossbow was invented. There was even a glimmer of hope for him to become a master architect. Dean went straight to the Congress Temple after leaving the castle. He went along the stone path behind the hill. He met some architects along the way. Some of them recognized him and took the initiative to greet him. Mr. Dean, are you going to the Congress Temple? An ordinary-looking brown-haired architect asked Dean in a careful manner. Yes. Dean nodded with a smile. He wasn't surprised. Although he hadn't read today's newspaper, but the news that he had received an invitation from the Congress Temple must have spread throughout the temple. The brown-haired man's eyes were full of awe as he saw Dean admit it. Mr. Dean is worthy to be the most outstanding genius of the temple in the last 50 years. We are going to see you at the Congress. Although both of them were of the same rank, but his attitude towards Dean was more polite than that of a senior architect. I'm flattered. Dean smiled politely. The brown-haired man replied, This is recognized by the temple. Mr. Dean, you don't need to be polite. I've heard that the military crossbow you made played an important role in the recent war. It solved the urgent need of the military. It's amazing. Dean felt that he wanted to be close to him, so he didn't say anything else. He maintained a smile. You flatter me. If he said too much, it would be hard to avoid the other party taking advantage of the situation to pull out more flattering words. At this moment, he suddenly understood why those celebrities of the old era had a large group of assistants following them. At the very least, when they were recognized, they didn't want to say too much but still had to maintain a friendly attitude. At this time, they could leave it to their assistants to be the bad guys and block the crowd of fans. Dean was followed by dozens of architects. In addition to primary and intermediate architects, there were 2 senior architects. But they were civilians. In the temple, the status of a civilian architect was relatively low. Their connections were far less than that of an aristocrat architect. Once an aristocrat became an architect, even if it was just an intermediate architect, their family would develop rapidly. There were hundreds of figures standing in front of the temple. There was no doubt that they were waiting for the end of the meeting. Outsiders were forbidden to watch the meeting, but once it was over they would be able to see the summary announcement of the meeting. They would be the first to know if there was any major event that happened. Dean's arrival immediately attracted everyone's attention. The previous brown-haired youth spontaneously escorted Dean and let the people in front of him make way for him. Dean passed through the crowd and stood in front of the temple. The god's servant at the door recognized Dean, but he still asked him to show his identity medal. After the verification, he respectfully invited him in. This was the first time that Dean had come to the temple. The temple was extremely magnificent and solemn. It gave him a sacred feeling that couldn't be profaned. He knew that this was one of the few places that could decide the fate of all the people in the outer wall. Dean stepped into the temple and came to the second floor of the conference room under the guidance of the maid. The conference room was rectangular and more than 10 meters long. The layout and color of the items in the room incomparably rendered the solemn atmosphere. There were 4 people sitting in the conference room. All of them were over 50 years old. There were some white hairs in their hair. One of them looked to be nearly 70 years old. He had white hair and wrinkled skin. His expression was incomparably indifferent. Several people who were talking to each other looked at Dean as he entered the council room. Dean greets the seniors. Dean took the initiative to greet them in a modest manner. A short and fat old man with a mustache stood up and said, "I didn't expect the genius in the rumors to be more handsome than I imagined." Good. Another old man with a wide face laughed. "Dean, there is a small meeting today. Everyone hasn't arrived yet. You should wait for a while." Dean saw that there was no malice in the old man's smile. He nodded and stood at the side. The chunky old man didn't ask him to take a seat when he saw him standing. It seemed that he didn't do anything wrong. In their eyes, his identity wasn't enough to take a seat. If he took a seat, it would be a kind of disrespect. In some places, etiquette and rules were very important. They wouldn't forgive you just because you didn't understand it for the first time. After a moment, 3 more people arrived. 2 men and 1 woman. There were a total of 7 people in the conference room. Everyone is here. The last person to arrive was an elegant old man. He glanced at everyone and glanced at Dean, who was standing next to him. He didn't say anything but said with a smile, "This small meeting mainly talks about 2 things. The first is about the youngest genius in the history of the temple to win the Epoch Medal, Mr. Dean." Dean's expression didn't change as he quietly listened. "Mr. Dean, please come to me," the elegant old man said to Dean in a friendly manner. Dean nodded and stood next to him. "Nice to meet you. My name is Serene." The elegant old man smiled. "Today's discussion is related to you. We know that you used to be a hunter before you joined the temple. I believe you have read the recent newspapers. Although the news about hunters is only published in the noble newspapers and the civilians are not aware of it, but your identity has been questioned by the nobles." Dean's eyes lit up. He knew that he didn't guess wrong. "Therefore, we hope that you can give up your profession as a hunter and become an oracle completely. Of course, if you want to learn other things or have other hobbies, such as music or poetry, we still welcome you. I heard that you are quite talented in poetry, and you have even been praised by Master Tiza. My granddaughter likes your poems very much." Serene laughed. "Yes," the stout old man said, "you are still young. Being a hunter is too dangerous. If you meet with an accident outside the giant wall, it will be a loss for all of us. You should wholeheartedly replace God and spread the power of God," the 70-year-old old man indifferently said. Dean smiled. To put it bluntly, being a hunter was not a good thing. Music and poetry were arts that were deeply loved by the nobles. They could bring a better aura to the person's identity. So naturally he would support him. "All right," Dean simply said, "but you all know that I am indebted to the Ryan family. The New World Consortium, founded by the Ryan family, has rented a passage outside the giant wall. They haven't relied on hunting to get back their capital, so the Ryan family hopes that I will teach them some hunting experience and the situation outside the giant wall when they recruit new hunters. I will completely give up hunting when they don't need me anymore." "Humph," the 70-year-old old man snorted. "Nonsense. You are a dignified architect. How can you mix with such low-level hunters? They are all lunatics and half-demons. Haven't you heard of the saying, 'Eyes peep into the darkness and you will get used to it'? If you stay with them for a long time and deal with monsters for a long time, you will become as violent and cruel as the monsters. You should completely stay away from them. You should stay in the temple to study and purify your mind." Chapter 312. "Humph. Sophistry." The 70-year-old man snorted. "Do you think that you can despise everything just because you got the Epoch Medal? When the sun rises, the darkness has already retreated. Why fight? How many people can you create a work of invention to replace the God of light to spread the gospel of the Lord? How many people can you benefit by hunting monsters? Can't you tell which is more important? Dudian calmly said. I said that I can quit as a hunter and concentrate on research. But I hope that you won't despise the hunter profession. If there are no hunters hunting monsters outside the giant wall, then what can you research? What do you know about the outside of the giant wall? Presumptuous. The 70-year-old man stood up and glared at Dudian. What are you talking about? Don't you have any etiquette? No wonder you are a peasant. You can't change your bad habits even after entering the temple. Dudian's face was cold. If you want me to respect your age, then I hope that you will show me the cultivation that belongs to your age. You. The 70-year-old man was so angry that his eyes were wide open. Well, Mr. Dean, don't be rude. Arson, don't bother with the younger generation. Mr. Dean comes from a civilian family and used to be a hunter. It's inevitable that he will have a bad temper. Please forgive him. The old man tried to persuade Dudian. The 70-year-old man, Arson, looked at him and restrained his anger. He coldly looked at Dudian. Based on your words today, I can conclude that it will be difficult for you to touch the toe of the Lord's boots in the future. In the Temple of Elements, Lord referred to the God of light and toe referred to the Master. The origin of the word Lord came from the early days of the temple. There was a master who had been awarded a prize. He said that he had only touched the toe of the Lord's boots. He had only seen the tip of the iceberg. Later on, this sentence became a popular saying of many masters. A lifetime is long. Don't talk too much. Dudian indifferently said. The old man in his 70s snorted coldly and sat back in his chair, not saying a word. He had seen too many geniuses and knew how proud they were. Dean was undoubtedly the most dazzling one among them. He was the youngest person in history to win the Epic Medal. Therefore, he sighed. Both of you, forget it. Mr. Dean has agreed to quit the hunter profession and will no longer go outside the giant wall. It shows that he knows the big picture. Arson, you don't have to follow the younger generation. Arson sneered and turned his head. Dean glanced at Arson's clothes and continued to listen to the words of the old man in a humble manner. In addition to this, the second thing is about the war outside the borders. The continuous war has put a lot of pressure on the border. The military hopes that we can create some new military magic to completely defeat the barbarians. All of you here have made some achievements in the field of military magic. I hope that you can shift your focus to military magic in the near future and strive to create some new product. The broad-faced old man looked around at the crowd and said slowly. Dean's eyes slightly moved, but he didn't speak. The people on both sides of the long table looked at each other and fell into contemplation. The old man stroked his beard. Since the last time I made the snow shadow bow, I haven't touched the military divine art for a long time. But I have seen the improved version of the snow shadow bow, made by some intermediate architects. It should be able to upgrade the snow shadow bow. It should be able to reach the 4-star intermediate grade. The old man smiled. 4-star mid-grade is enough. I didn't expect such a terrible weapon like the snow shadow bow to have such a significant improvement. It seems that your attainments in this area have penetrated deep into the bone marrow. I'm flattered. The old man laughed and waved his hand. There was a bit of pride on his face. The old man smiled and looked at Dudian. Mr. Dean, your military crossbow is very good. If you can improve it, then it will be very helpful to the situation on the battlefield. I hope you can go back and study it. Dean nodded. I will. Well, the meeting is over, the old man announced. Everyone got up, passed by Dean, and went out one after another. Some of them nodded to him as they passed by. Some of them didn't even look at him. They had their own pride as masters. Even though Dean was an architect with extraordinary potential, He would become an outstanding master in the future. But it was possible that he would be stuck at the intermediate level. It wasn't impossible for him to get to know him in advance. The old man patted Dean's shoulder after everyone left. "Let's go. Don't take Arson's temper to heart. He is right. I believe in your ability, but there is still etiquette. After all, he isn't the only master here." Dean looked at him. He knew that the old man was being kind. People of each rank had their own circle. They allowed infighting, but they didn't allow outsiders to despise them. This was the reason why he saw that the attitude of two masters wasn't as easygoing as before. It was obvious that they thought that Dean had despised all the masters. Well, Dean nodded but didn't say much. After leaving the Parliament, the Grand Masters walked out of the shrine one after another. They were escorted by their students on the first floor. They arrived at the carriage parked outside the shrine and left in it. The people waiting in front of the meeting made a spacious path for them. They looked at the masters in awe. There were more than 100 people, but there wasn't any noise. Dean and the old man came out side by side after all the masters had left. There was a commotion in the crowd when they saw Dean. There seemed to be a few exclamations. They didn't expect that the genius teenager who had been in the newspapers would be able to walk with the masters. It was such an honor that it made people jealous. Dean regretted that he didn't come by carriage as he looked at the crowd. "I'll go first. Take good care of the new invention." The old man lifted the curtain and smiled at Dean. Dean nodded. The commotion in the surroundings suddenly quieted down. Only after the carriage of the broad-faced old man rolled away did the crowd burst into an uproar. Everyone gasped and looked at the young man in the field with admiration and envy. They didn't expect that the progress of the latter's theurgy had already caught the attention of the Grandmaster. It should be known that the latter was only in the middle order. After the carriage was far away, Dean quickly left along with the crowd. The crowd reacted and immediately chased after him. Dean quickly ran. He didn't use his hunter's strength, but he was able to easily run past the weak architects. It must be known that his scavenger training wasn't in vain. Dean went to his own room after returning to the castle. He dismantled the lightning rod and wrapped it up. Then he carried it to the temple. This time he directly took the public carriage in the castle. Dean got off the carriage and dragged the suitcases down. He carried them with both hands and entered the temple. There were more than a dozen people in the temple. They were queuing up to submit their inventions. Dean came to a queue and waited for the 4 people in front to leave. Huh! The person in front saw someone behind him and looked back. Suddenly, he screamed in surprise and looked at Dean in confusion. He was startled and surprised. You are Dean? Genius Dean?" "Hello." Dean politely replied. The youth was flattered. Hello. Are you here to submit your invention?" Dean nodded. "Please, you go first," the youth said. Dean quickly refused. "No, you go first." "It's all right, I have a lot of time." "All right." Dean exchanged places with the youth. At this time, the 3 people in front heard the youth's voice and looked back. The girl in front of Dean had a few small freckles on her face. Her face was full of excitement and nervousness. "I'll exchange places with you. You go first." Dean saw the primary architect medal on her chest. Her hair color meant that she had such achievements at such an age. He didn't be polite and changed his position. The 2 people in front of him immediately changed their positions with Dean. "Please submit your work of divinity," the man behind the counter said to the young man in front of him, and turned around to get the form. When he turned back, he saw the young man behind him. The young man in front of him was a fair-skinned young man. He was a little startled. He suddenly felt a little familiar. "You are." Dean handed over the suitcase. "This is my invention. My name is Dean." He handed over another folder. "This is the design and assembly drawings." "Dean?" The woman behind the counter heard the name and suddenly remembered. She was pleasantly surprised. "It's you? Your new invention?" Yes. The woman was a little excited, but she didn't know what to say. She took the suitcase and quickly handed out the form. She said happily, "Fill in the identity form, and then brand your medal on it." Dean quickly filled out the form and took off the medal. He printed it in a red powder box and then covered the form. Soon a metal pattern appeared with his name engraved on it. The review period is 1 to 3 days. It will be postponed by 1 day if there is a prayer day, the woman said with a smile. Thank you. Dudian thanked them and left the counter. He thanked the 4 people who gave up their positions to him. He quickly left the temple and returned to his castle. The woman behind the counter didn't care about the rest of the 4 people as Dean left the temple. She picked up the form filled by Dean as well as the materials on the ground and went back to the small room. She came to a table and said to a middle-aged woman who was busy, "Sister Lily, this is Dean's new invention. It belongs to the genius Dean." Sister Lee looked up in surprise. "Is it his?" She took the form from the woman's hand. She was startled when she saw the metal stamp on it. "I know. You can go now." The woman nodded and left the small room after she put down the things. After she left, Big Cicely quickly stacked the suitcases on the ground and called a guard next to her. "You carry these and follow me." "Yes," the guard replied. Half an hour later, Sister Lee and the guard appeared in another castle and handed the suitcase to the staff behind the counter of this castle. The staff behind the counter saw the red mark on the suitcases. They knew that it meant priority review. They immediately sent people to the priority channel. The second floor of the 9th castle. Tea room. A slender woman was sitting in front of the piano. She was playing melodious music. The music was like a gurgling spring that surrounded the hall. There was a tea table under the piano. Ivissa took the tea from the table and poured it into the empty teacup in front of him. It was an old hand that picked up the cup of tea. The face of the old man was the same as Arson, who Dean had just met. "Don't you think it's annoying?" Arson drank the tea. There was still some anger in his tone. "You think that you will be a master in the future after getting the epic medal?" "Geniuses are always like this." Ivissa laughed. Arson said in a bad mood, "What genius? Which one of us wasn't a genius when we were young? Which one of us wasn't a genius to reach this step?" Ivissa slyly smiled. Copenhagen wasn't one. He was 60 years old when he started as a primary architect, but he soared to the sky and entered the Hall of Master. That's an exception. Arson rolled his eyes. How many of us are late bloomers like him? Look at the primary architect. How many of them are 60 years old and are still conscientiously studying the invention? Those who are in their 40s, have long been tired of the path of magic, bewitched by the music and music provided by the nobles in the outside world, indulging in worldly pleasures. These people are the vermin of the shrine, they should be expelled. It is indeed a long and boring road. There aren't many people like Copenhagen who have persisted for decades. Ivissa sighed. Arson snorted. Everything is a failure if there is no determination. Like this kid. So what if he is talented? Arrogant. Untouchables are untouchables. They won't learn how to eat in silence. Ivissa smiled but didn't reply. At this time, the butler of the castle ran over and respectfully said, "Master E, there is a new lightning invention in the temple. They want you to review and identify it." Chapter 313. Lightning Faction? Ivissa was startled. Arson saw his expression and couldn't help but smile. "Congratulations. Although you don't have many lightning oracles, but every time a lightning item is born, it is always at least 2 stars. The destructive power of lightning magic is too great. If this is a military item, it will definitely play a great role in the war." "You are flattering me." Ivissa laughed. "I'll go and have a look. I heard that Harley's work is almost complete. Maybe it is his thing." "Well, I'll go back too." Arson got up. Both of them went out of the castle together. Ivica also went to his own carriage after Arson left. They went to the Temple of Review. Dean ordered Sergei and Gwyneth to continue smelting the tungsten steel after he returned to the castle. This time they didn't cast a cage but 10 meters long spears. The tip of the spear was attached with shark fin barbs. Each spear had a hole in the back and was tied with a thick tungsten steel chain. Each chain was more than 150 meters long. Each spear weighed more than 1,000 kilograms including the chain. When the first shark spear appeared, Sergei, Gwyneth, Jean, Nicholas and the others were shocked to see it. The tungsten steel spear was heavy and sharp. It was just quietly placed in the open space next to the furnace, but it made people feel a chill down their spines. It seemed that even the air around them was a lot colder. "Are you going to use this to hunt?" Sergei was shocked as he looked at the teenager who was standing next to the furnace. What kind of hunter's mind was that he could come up with such a terrible weapon? Dean continued to carve the model in his hand. He didn't reply as it was necessary to maintain a sense of mystery as the leader. The main purpose of the shark lance was to hunt the Great Splitter and other giant monsters in the future. It wasn't his original creation, but he had learned it from the super chip. In the Middle Ages, some fishermen would go to the sea to hunt great white sharks, whales and other giant sea beasts. However, the size of the shark lance wasn't as strong as this one. It wasn't made of tungsten steel and the ropes were linen rope. Sergei and the others were amazed for a moment but continued to work. Soon the remaining 7,000 kilograms of tungsten steel were used up. Dean contacted the Temple of Elements and bought another batch of tungsten steel. But this time he didn't look for Ellen, but another person. Although looking for Ellen would save him time, but he didn't understand Ellen's life circle. Moreover, he didn't have time to understand her life circle. If it was spread out, it would inevitably attract the attention of other consortiums. The production of the shark spear continued in the afternoon until the evening. After Dean finished carving the mold, the rest of the smelting work was handed over to Sergei, Gwyneth, Nicholas and others. Although they didn't have much experience, but the skills involved in this matter weren't that high. They could basically master it after teaching them once. Dean went back to his room and took out a few rolls of snowpaper. This was the paper with the highest level of craftsmanship. It was used by nobles. He spread out the snowpaper and poured the ink into the quill pen. He pondered for a moment and then began to carve the design drawings. If other architects saw this, they would be very surprised because Dean's pen was very stable. Whether it was straight lines or curved lines, he drew them more accurately than a ruler. Even Gwyneth and Sergei would be surprised if they saw this. Such fine control of power was something that even veteran hunters couldn't achieve. Dean was used to it. The flexibility of his right hand was inseparable from the exercise of his left hand. It was also inseparable from his daily self-training in prison. Most people who entered a prison like the Thornflower prison would abandon themselves to despair. But Dean had been thinking about various hunting techniques and exercising his body's flexibility in addition to digging holes. He firmly believed that one day he would be able to get out of there. It turned out that persistence was an advantage at some point. Whoosh! The outline of a fine structure gradually appeared as the quill pen drew on the snow paper. The shape was strange. Only Dean knew that the things written on the paper would completely change the world and the entire temple. And this was the first step on the road of conquest. A few hours later, the few sheets of paper were completely filled with drawings. There were no traces of any alterations, as if they had been made by nature. The meticulous structure, the specific functions of each part, and the purpose of the entire work were all written on the design paper. The picture was harmonious and pleasing to the eye. Dean put away the pen and spread out a few pieces of paper. He waited for them to dry before rolling them up and putting them into a silk bag. Then he put them into his dark box. Dean came to the windowsill and looked at the training ground behind the castle. Sergey and the others were smelting tungsten steel. He saw that they weren't lazy, so he took out the wood carving and continued to carve with his left hand. Although he had been practicing for a long time, but he felt that there wasn't a significant effect on his left hand. But the improvement of his right hand was very obvious. However, Dean didn't lack patience. The next day, Dean found another person and bought a batch of tungsten steel materials. This time he didn't refine shark spear but cannon crossbow. Such a heavy shark spear couldn't be thrown to kill the enemy. Only a cannon crossbow could accurately shoot into the target's body. The structure of the cannon crossbow was similar to that of a cannon. The key point was the tension rope. It was a kind of synthetic rope made of monster materials. It was not a pure fiber. It was generally used by the army in the border fortress. However, the shape of the arrow was more traditional. It could only be used to hunt barbarians. Often a crossbow arrow could penetrate the chest of 7 or 8 people and nailed them to the ground. The strength of the arrow was so great that it could be seen that it was terrifying. However, the crossbow shaft was made of wood while Dean's was made of tungsten steel. There was a huge difference in the weight. Therefore, the requirements for the rope were extremely high. Dean engraved the mold after the materials were transported back. He used eagle tendon rope to make a crossbow. Sergey, Gwyneth, Nicholas and others held their breath as they went to the hillside behind the castle to test it out. Whoosh! The tungsten steel shark spear jumped out when the rope popped out. The chain behind the spear rattled as it flew for hundreds of meters. Its momentum was greatly reduced as it slid down and pierced the ground. It penetrated 4 or 5 meters deep. Chapter 3:14. When Sergey and the others saw this, the look of expectation on their faces faded as they shook their heads and sighed. Nicholas said, "The weight of the spear is still too heavy. It doesn't have enough elasticity. It can only shoot 100 meters away. If it is used to hunt big guys, it would be difficult to hit the target. Moreover, the distance is too close and the shooter is in danger." Sergey nodded. Yes. Dean was lost in thought as he looked at the shark spear. Although he had expected the elasticity to be a problem, he still had to try. There were only 2 solutions. The first one was to reduce the weight of the spear and replace the material. The second one was to increase the elasticity of the crossbow. The lethality would be reduced a lot if he chose the first option. Although there were many materials to choose from, but the lethality would be reduced. Even if the target was hit, the effect would be greatly reduced. As for the second option, the eagle tendon rope was the best rope at present. It had reached the limit of elasticity. Dean looked up and asked Sergey, Gwyneth, and others to put away the things. He needed more time to think about it. Back to the castle, Dean asked Nicholas to serve breakfast. He read today's newspaper while eating. He mainly wanted to see the movements of the temple and the Melon family. The youngest epic medal winner in history. The creator of the legendary new textile machine and the 4-star military crossbow. Mr. Dean's new invention has been born. It is reported that the new invention isn't a wood one but an extremely rare lightning one. Dean looked at the front page of the temple's newspaper. He saw that his news had occupied the front page. In the past, almost all the news that made the headlines were about masters. However, he had occupied the front page as an intermediate architect. This point surprised many people. Dean's status would increase by a few notches. Dean had expected that the news of the new invention would leak out, but he didn't expect that it would attract so much attention. He was surprised, but he was relieved after thinking about it. He had made 2 inventions in advance. The lowest one was the military crossbow, and the new textile machine was a legendary item. It was the key to an era. There was no need to say more about its value. His third invention had attracted more attention than the second one. If the third invention was identified as a 2-star or 3-star item, then his reputation was bound to enter a buffering stage. If the following inventions were only 2-star or 3-star level, then it would be difficult for him to get into the headlines of the temple. The myth of genius would be shattered and gradually fade away from people's eyes. Dean put down the newspaper and gently rubbed his fingers. He flipped to another newspaper. This was the newspaper of the Mellon Consortium. It was about the various industries under the Mellon Consortium. For the vast majority of ordinary people, they naturally didn't know that the Mellon Consortium was behind these industries. Therefore, the propaganda power and influence of this newspaper had been greatly enhanced. According to the staff of the Temple of Elements, the genius Dean rarely went to the temple recently. The success rate of the new lightning invention is very low. The road of genius will die on the road of pride. According to the newspaper interview, the leading singer of the Moulin Rouge accompanied Dean to watch the song and dance yesterday. Dean flipped to the second page and saw the news about himself. He slowly glanced at it and put away the newspaper. Ina, who was the head of the Moulin Rouge, was probably just an unknown singer who had been invited by the Mellon Consortium. One wanted to discredit him, and the other wanted to become famous, so they hit it off. Although he expected that the Mellon Consortium would make a move, but he didn't think that it would be so despicable. Many things were nonsense and completely baseless, but he couldn't fight back. If he sued the newspaper, then the responsibility would be shifted to the singer. If he sued the singer, then his image would be entangled with the singer. In short, no matter how he fought back, he would be defeated. This was the means of the Mellon Consortium to smear his reputation. Most of the common people were happy to see this kind of thing, and it became the best topic of conversation after eating and drinking. Moreover, most of the people believed in evil and doubted the good, so the only way for this matter to stick to him was to rely on his own works to speak. A group of rats. Dean's eyes slightly narrowed. Although he was calm and rational enough, but he was still a teenager. It was inevitable that his heart was burning with killing intent. Dean put away the newspaper and finished his breakfast. He went to the training ground and touched the firing crossbow. He was lost in thought. Temple of Elements. Castle. Ivissa was standing in an empty room. He was looking at the metal tower in front of him. He was holding the design drawings in his hand. He carefully observed the parts and theoretical ideas in the drawings. From time to time he would look at the things in front of him. His brows were wrinkled. After a moment, he turned to the second design drawing and continued to browse. He was startled when he saw a metal structure that looked like a base. This. He gently blinked as he carefully looked at it. Can it be like this? No one answered his words in the empty room. The temple's attendant stood respectfully on the side and didn't move. Ivissa quickly flipped through the design manuscript. After a moment, he turned back and asked the waiter, "Who made this invention?" "I'm sorry, Master Ivissa. This is confidential," the attendant respectfully replied. Ivissa was startled. He couldn't wait to pat his head. He put away the design drawings and said, "Today is cloudy. It should rain tomorrow. We will wait for the thunder to test the effect. If it is successful..." His eyelids slightly twitched as he thought of this. If the design drawings were true, then the value of this thing would be too great. It should be noted that there were many lightning bolts during the rainy season and the black snow season. Many residents, including nobles, would be struck by lightning bolts. It was a small matter if the houses were damaged, but it would be terrible if people were crushed to death. Moreover, as far as he knew, the number of people who died from natural lightning bolts was at least a third of those who died from radiation. This was an extremely terrifying number. "Yes," the attendant respectfully replied as he heard Ivissa's words. Ivissa put down the design drawings and turned to leave the empty room. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 3:15. July 29th. The weather was gloomy. Dark clouds covered the sky over the giant wall. The turbid light was covered by the dark clouds. The air was a bit cold. The pedestrians on the street had put on the thick winter clothes of the black snow season and wrapped themselves tightly. In the commercial district, the residential district, the huge square of the slums, and in front of the temple of the Holy Church, there were already staff of the Holy Church building the altar. 2 days later, at the beginning of August, which was the first day of the black snow season, would be the routine prayer day. It was extremely grand. Whether civilians or nobles, they would pray to the great God of light at home or under the altar with the priests of the temple, asking for blessings, so that the people would not suffer. On the top of a towering divine castle on Mount Daga, several divine emissaries were busy building a giant steeple to the highest point of the divine castle. The cold wind blew their magic robes and messy their hair. Hurry up! Hurry up! Bury the wire first! A spirited old man commanded from the side. It was Ivissa. Several architects moved swiftly as they pulled the wire down the groove on the ground. Old E, do you think this thing will work? Another short, skinny elder asked casually. Ivissa shook his head. It's hard to say. We will know when the lightning comes. In any case, this thing has put forward many concepts of lightning faction. Even if it doesn't succeed, it can barely be classified as a 3-star item. That's good. The short old man nodded. This man should have a deep understanding of the power of lightning. He knows how to use the latest plastic material as an insulator. Perhaps it is the work of Bello. He has been studying lightning for decades. Now it's time for him to be promoted to master. Ivissa faintly smiled but didn't answer. Bello was a friend of the short old man. Naturally, he was favored by the latter. But in Ivissa's opinion, there were no less than 3 people who had the talent to make this thing. The only thing that made him regret was that he had asked his students 2 days ago. But they weren't the ones who made this thing. Otherwise, he would be proud of himself. Rumble! At this time, a muffled sound of thunder echoed in the sky. Ivissa and the short old man were startled. Their eyes lit up as they said, "Get ready! Everyone retreat!" The architects who were busy in front of the steeple quickly finished the final work. They quickly retreated and followed Ivissa and the short old man to leave the place. They went to another high-rise building next to it. Ivissa and the short old man wore binoculars that were covered with plastic protection. They looked up at the gloomy clouds. A heavy rain was imminent. At this time, a staff member of the Divine Hall brought a few large umbrellas for them to use when it rained. Ivissa looked back and was shocked. "Take that thing away! Do you want to kill us?" The architects also noticed the mistake of the young staff member. The latter was at a loss and nervous. They rushed forward and snatched the umbrellas from his hands. They threw it in the corridor behind them. The umbrellas were made of metal. It was easy to attract lightning. One of the architects shouted, "Bastard! Are you blind? You dare to let us hold the umbrellas here? Get some raincoats." The young staff immediately realized his mistake. He was so scared that his face turned pale. His legs trembled as he answered in a trembling voice and hurriedly turned around and ran away. After a moment, Ivissa and others put on raincoats as they stood on the floor. Rumble! Thunder and lightning swam in the dark clouds. Electric snakes tore through the sky and lit up the gloomy world. It was as if it was daytime in an instant. The short old man whispered as he stared at the steeple giant, "You have arranged the iron to attract lightning. When the lightning comes down, it will definitely hit." Ivissa squinted his eyes as he looked at the steeple giant. Boom! The sound of thunder suddenly echoed. The pressure in the air decreased as the humidity gradually increased. After 7 or 8 minutes, Ivissa felt cold in his nose. It was a drop of rain. He looked up at the sky and immediately put on his rain hat as he waited quietly. Boom! A thick purple lightning crossed the sky. It seemed as if a flood dragon was leaping. The purple lightning split from the middle and fell on the metal pole on top of the steeple giant along with the drizzle. The bright purple lightning twisted 10 meters away from them. It seemed as if the steeple giant was the hand of a god. It caught the lightning snake from the clouds and held it in its hand. Ivissa and others' pupils shrank. They felt a slight numbness on their skin and scalp. Their whole body was aroused with goosebump. Their blood couldn't help but speed up. They were shocked by the magnificent scene in front of them, but they were also stimulated by the electrostatic field attached to the lightning. The lightning stayed on the retinas for less than 2 seconds. Then it gradually disappeared. The steeple giant was still intact. Ivissa and the short old man raised their binoculars to look at the steeple giant. They found that there was no trace of damage on the ground. They couldn't help but jump. They knew that the invention was successful. Boom! Another bolt of lightning struck down, hitting the giant's spire and wrapping around the metal pole. When the lightning disappeared, the ground was still unscathed. At this time, the rain was getting heavier and the lightning was getting fiercer. Rumble! The lightning was pulled down from the sky and hit the steeple giant. Ordinary lightning rods naturally couldn't have such a high rate of lightning. But in order to verify the effect of the lightning rod, Ivissa arranged a lot of iron around the lightning rod. It greatly increased the probability of lightning falling. At the same time, because of the giant wall, it had some influence on the climate. The height of the clouds was generally lower than outside the giant wall. This was one of the reasons why lightning was one of the main disasters inside the giant wall. The lightning rod was unscathed in the continuous lightning strike. Ivissa and the others watched the scene of lightning flashing more than 10 meters away. They were shocked at the beginning but gradually intoxicated by the magnificence of the lightning. It was like watching a great art exhibition. The rain lasted for more than 3 hours. Ivissa, the short old man and others stood in the rain for more than 3 hours. Even if they were the highest master of opera or music, they wouldn't be able to stand in the rain for more than 3 hours. In the castle, the oil lamp on the wall burned quietly, and the fragrant light warmed the entire hall. All the windows were closed, and the rain gently fell outside the window. 2 maids stood quietly together, and it was obvious that their legs were a little sore from standing, but they still quietly persevered. Sergei, Gwyneth, Jean and others were sitting on the sofa. They were eating the newly bought fruit. Dudian stood in front of a window. He gently opened the window and looked at the crystal-clear rain. Although it looked clean and bright, but he could see that the water was light black. Naturally, it wasn't because the ground was too dirty. "Master, are you cold?" Nicholas came forward and asked in a respectful tone. Dudian didn't look back. "Come here." Nicholas was startled but still took a small step forward. Dudian asked, "What do you see?" Nicotine was taken aback. He looked out of the window and asked doubtfully, "Rain? Where does the rain come from?" "Of course it comes from the dark clouds." "Where does the dark clouds come from?" This slave doesn't know." Dudian was silent. He seemed to be lost as he whispered, "Have you ever thought about the meaning of human life?" Nicholas was slightly startled. His eyes flashed as he said, "This servant does not understand such a philosophical question. I only know that my purpose here is to serve you well. Although I have offended you many times in the past, and my heart is rebellious, but now that I am old, I do not want to struggle anymore. I hope Master can trust me once more." Dudian retracted his eyes and looked at Nicholas. Nicholas's eyes were calm and full of sincerity. Dudian raised his hand and patted Nicholas's shoulder. "Prepare a carriage for me. I'm going to the Ryan family." "Yes," Nicholas replied in a respectful tone. Sergei and others heard that Dudian was going to go out. Jean said, "I'll go with you." "No need," Sergei casually said as he peeled a fruit. "You have been going to the Ryan family every night for the past few days. Have you taken a fancy to a lady of the Ryan family?" Dudian glanced at him but didn't say anything. He waited for Nicholas to prepare the carriage. He put on a raincoat and got into the carriage. Dudian took the carriage to a butcher's shop in a remote town. Dudian spent 2 silver coins to buy an iron-back pig that weighed 200 pounds. It was a high-grade type of pig. The meat quality was close to that of beef. Like last time, Dudian asked the butcher to slaughter the iron-back pig and put it into the carriage. Then he drove the carriage to the suburbs. He left the carriage in a small town hotel near the fortress. He asked the proprietress to clean the carriage and take good care of it. He dragged the ironback boar that he had tossed into the bushes outside the town and left quickly under the cover of the night. After a while, he arrived at a remote place in the stronghold. As he had expected, the patrols were relatively loose on rainy days. Moreover, this stronghold was remote and the barbarians had never attacked this place before. As a result, the number of guards here was not bad. Dean carried the ironback pig on his back and quickly climbed over the fortress. The weight of 200 pounds was like a weapon to him. It was not heavy at all. After sneaking across the fortress, he immediately flew away in the darkness. After a moment, Dean came to the place where Splitter was kept. He went into the desolate building and opened the hole covered by the branches on the ground. He carried the ironback pig and jumped into the basement. He saw Splitter sleeping soundly in the cage. The moment he landed on the ground, Splitter heard movement. It raised its head and saw Dudian. It squeaked a few times as it saw Dudian. It seemed to be excited as it rubbed the cage with its scythe arms. Dudian pulled out the dagger and cut off the ironback pig's trotters. He threw them into the gap of the tungsten steel cage. The scythe arms of Splitter swarmed up and cut the trotters into 7 or 8 pieces. It picked them up from the ground and ate them. The dagger in Dudian's hand was used to kill monsters. It was easy to cut the ironback pig's body and threw it into the cage to feed Splitter. In just a few days the color of Splitter's carapace was slightly darker than before, but there was still a layer of color that hadn't faded. It looked like the paint was applied unevenly. Dudian had seen the previous Splitter that he had killed. The color of the whole body had changed to a very dark color in just 5 days. The carapace and scythe arms looked very strong and hard. But Splitter was a bit miserable. It had been 4 days, but it didn't grow much. The color of the carapace hadn't completely changed. The main reason was that the nutrition it ate was too poor. "Little guy, be obedient. I'll kill your mother in a few days. Then we can go outside the giant wall together. I'll let you enjoy a little freedom." Dudian threw the pork to Splitter as he talked to himself. Splitter quickly ate the pork that was thrown into the cage. It was very happy and excited. After all, it was the only meal it had every day. Dudian put on a raincoat and took out a small sachet that was hanging around his neck. It was different from the other sachets. It didn't contain spices but the blood and dried shell of Splitter. Dudian returned to the giant wall after leaving the basement. After several back and forth, Dudian was familiar with the route. Half an hour later, he bypassed a desolate mountain range. Suddenly, he saw a shadow swaying at the foot of the mountain in front of him, like a ghost. Dean was surprised. He fixed his eyes on them and couldn't help but be startled. He saw that in the drizzle, the silhouettes were connected to each other. It looked like more than a dozen people. These people were in a team, holding strange long weapons in their hands, quietly moving in one direction. Dudian's heart skipped a beat. Barbarians? He quietly pushed aside the grass and approached. He immediately saw the appearance of these people clearly. Some were tall, some were short, but their skin was dark and rough. They looked like people from remote tribes like India in the West in the old era. They had beast-tooth collars around their necks, and in their hands were weapons inlaid with beast bones and wooden sticks. At their waists were fine short knives. They seemed a bit out of place. Dudian thought of the knives he had picked up last time outside the giant wall. His face slightly changed. He didn't think that the knives were really used by barbarians. He saw that the barbarians didn't have raincoat. They didn't care about the rain falling on their bodies. At the moment the barbarians went to a steep wall that was overgrown with weeds. The barbarians at the front pushed away the weeds and went in. The rest of the barbarians went in and put the weeds back to the original position. Dudian estimated that he wouldn't have noticed the barbarians' nest if he didn't see them enter. He gently sniffed. Although the rain diluted the smell, but he could still smell a mixture of human and beast. He remembered the smell and quietly left the place. Chapter 3:16. July 30th. It was cloudy. After yesterday's heavy rain, the air was rather humid, and the breeze was biting cold. The change in the climate indicated that the terrible black snow season was coming. The sacrificial platform in the light church and in the square had been built, and a large number of people had gathered under the platform, clustered around the statue on the platform. Although the ceremony had not officially begun, the people had already begun to pray devoutly. On the same day, at the break of dawn, in the castle of the House of Chai, the main family of the Scott consortium, a figure secretly entered the castle from the side. Two figures were waiting at the entrance of the passage. The figure came to a secret room in the castle and took out a secret report. The cover of the report was engraved with 9 stars. Nobles were very familiar with this symbol. It symbolized the main institution of the Holy Church, the Temple of Elements. An old man wearing a black mask in the secret room seemed to know the identity of the person who came. He quickly took the secret report and opened it. There was a short poem by a famous poet on it. He glanced at it and his pupils suddenly shrank. His fingers holding the secret report slightly trembled. After a moment, he restrained his shock and said in a hoarse voice, "Go." The shadow who handed over the secret report didn't say anything. He just nodded and quickly turned around and left. After watching him leave, the black-masked old man put away the secret report, turned around, and entered another secret passage in the underground secret room. After passing through several corridors, he came to a basement where miscellaneous items were stored. He turned around and twisted the mechanism on the wall, closing the door of the secret basement under the miscellaneous items basement. He took off his mask and put it in his robe, walked out of the miscellaneous items basement, and came to the hall of the castle. He looked at the 60-years-old clock on the wall. It was still early. He took a light breath and slowly exhaled. His mood calmed down. He looked for the maid. "It's getting late. Get ready to work." "Yes, butler." The maid looked at the old man and replied. The sun rose and the warm sunlight shone on the window of the castle. The young ladies and young masters of the Chai family all woke up one after another. Some of the younger third-generation descendants were curled up in their blankets, unwilling to get out of bed. At 7 o'clock, all the ladies and young masters came to the hall. Even the third generation who liked to sleep in were no exception. Because at this time, their grandfather, the head of the Chai family, Chai Rostov, would get up on time and come to the hall to enjoy breakfast with everyone. This was the way of life of the Chai family, and no one dared to disobey. However, the young masters and ladies of the Chai family were waiting in the hall for a long time. They couldn't help but feel anxious and surprised. In their memory, Chai Rostov never got up late. His life was as regular as a marionette. This could only mean that there was something more important waiting for Chai Rostov's bed, and it was usually the business of the consortium. For a time, everyone in the hall had different thoughts and guesses. Chastov's room. Looking at the secret report handed over by the old butler, Chai Rostov rubbed his eyes and took the report. He stretched out his other hand. The butler took the glasses and respectfully handed it over to Chai Rostov. After putting on his glasses, Chai slowly opened the secret report and read through it. Then, he slowly closed the report and handed it to the old butler. His facial expression didn't change much. His thick eyebrows were full of majesty and mysteriousness. It seemed like he had countless thoughts in his mind and could see through countless people's hearts. "Old master," The old butler looked at him inquiringly. Chai Rostov was silent for a moment. This time, we must get this thing at all costs. Yes. The butler nodded respectfully. Chai Rostov put on his shoes and got out of bed. He changed his clothes and went to the hall with the old butler. In the hall, all the ladies and young masters of the Chai family stood up in awe. After Chai Rostov sat down, everyone sat down according to their status. The old butler passed the morning newspaper to Chai Rostov. He knew that Chai Rostov liked to read the newspaper during breakfast as it would save time and increase efficiency. The first newspaper that Chai Rostov picked up was not the newspaper of his consortium, nor the newspaper of the nobles, but the newspaper of the military. For him, he already knew what would happen to his consortium and what would be reported in tomorrow's newspaper. At his level, there were only two things that could shake the foundation of the Scott consortium. The first was the military and the second was the Holy Church. Currently, the war at the border was unpredictable, and it was hard to predict the situation. He could only rely on the military newspaper to understand the situation. This war was not a life and death battle for him, it was a business opportunity for him to make money. His famous saying was, "Where there is a struggle, there is a business." This saying had influenced many rich businessmen. It was also the principle that he used to do business. Relying on the geographical advantage of the fortress and the military magic, they are still at a disadvantage? Chai Rostov thought. These barbarians who only rely on brute force actually learned to use strategy. Interesting. On the same morning, Huashan Consortium, Melon Consortium, Krulov Consortium and other 5 consortia received secret reports from their staff in the Temple of Elements. When they confirmed the above information, all the consortia were like silent beasts. But at the break of dawn, they started to move again. Chai Rostov woke up from his bed. The temple's newspaper had been distributed to all the castles. The silence of the morning was broken by the uproar. All the castles exclaimed in shock. There were 7 eye-catching words on the front page of the newspaper: Dean's new invention, especially the words lightning rod. It was the special color of the newspaper. It meant that it was an invention. The same newspaper was also sent to Dean's castle and appeared in his hands. When he saw the news on the headlines, there was a faint smile on his face. In yesterday's heavy rain, he had expected that today's results would be out, and sure enough, it would be the result. The youngest epic medal winner in history. Mr. Dean is only 16 years old. Today his third invention has been born. After the epic-making legendary work, new textile machine and the 4-star medium-grade military crossbow, the third invention, lightning rod, has been born. The lightning rod. Many people will be puzzled by the name. Isn't Mr. Dean a wood architect? The author thought so too. But Mr. Dean has told me what is a genius and what is extraordinary. Everyone's guess is not wrong. As the name says, this is a lightning item. Yes, it is the most destructive lightning item in the Temple of Elements. According to the identification of the temple, Master Ivissa, Master Kos and Master Mickey, the grade of lightning rod is 4-star. Dean browsed through the newspaper. Although there were some exaggerated modifiers, it was generally good. At least he couldn't pick out any problems. What surprised him was that the grade of the lightning rod was even higher than the military crossbow. 4-star upper grade, this was already close to the work of a 5th-grade grandmaster. The military crossbow is a military item. Although it plays a big role in the war, but the number of enemies it can kill is limited. Moreover, it can only be used in times of war. However, the lightning rod is a civilian item. Moreover, it can protect the lives of civilians. It can also save people's lives. The military crossbow is a kind of military weapon. In a battle, the two sides don't rely on each other's weapons, but whose weapon is the strongest. The role of the military crossbow is to dominate in mid-range combat. If there is a better weapon, then it can replace the military crossbow in this field. The military crossbow will cease production and become worthless. The only value is the combat concept that the weapon itself has. But the lightning rod is a lightning element work. It is the first time in many years that the giant wall has been able to defend against the lightning attack. It's already underestimated that it is rated as a 4-star work. If they understand the core principle of the lightning rod, the magnetic field of electricity and other aspects, it is not an exaggeration to rate it as a 5-star work. In any case, he expected the lightning rod to reach the 4-star level. After all, the Temple of Elements didn't only look at the work itself but also the current situation, environment and other factors to judge. Dean saw the second news in the newspaper. It turned out to be about him. One person occupied the headlines and the second page. According to the Temple statistics, Mr. Dean's accumulated points have reached the level of senior architect. From today onwards, he will be promoted to a senior architect. Dean glanced at the newspaper and almost forgot about the point. Indeed, it was enough to promote to a senior architect after producing 2 4-star work. Most architects had to produce a large number of 2-star and 3-star works to accumulate enough points to be promoted to a senior architect. It was a hard requirement of the Temple. No matter how high the points were, one must have a 4-star work in order to be promoted to a senior architect. Similarly, an intermediate architect must have a 3-star work in order to be promoted to a senior architect. As for the masters of the Temple, the difficulty was much higher. They must produce 2 5-star works in order to be promoted to a master. Therefore, there was a huge gap between a master and an architect. Nicholas, who was standing behind Dean, was shocked as he saw Dean reading the newspaper. Although he knew very little about the Temple of Elements, but he still remembered the experience of a primary architect from the Temple. But now Dean was a senior architect. Moreover, it could be seen from the newspaper that his status was much higher than an ordinary senior architect. Church Hill, the 9th Castle. Ivissa held the newspaper in his hand as his complexion turned ugly. Although he could find out who the creator of the invention was, but he was too lazy to use his connections. In any case, the invention wasn't his. But he didn't think that this magnificent lightning invention turned out to be the work of this person. How was it possible? How was it possible for a 16-year-old boy to produce a top-grade 4-star item? If Dean was from a tailor's family, then he was able to produce the military crossbow, which was his talent. But what about the invention of lightning? Genius? Genius? He suddenly remembered that a long time ago, this young man came to the shrine for the first time and came here to visit him. He wanted to be his assistant and participate in a project he had produced at that time, but he refused. He did not expect that today, the latter had achieved such achievements in lightning magic and entered the ranks of senior architects. If one only looked at his resume, it should be more magnificent than any other senior architect's resume. Ivissa slightly gritted his teeth as he threw the newspaper on the table. In another divine castle, Arsene was eating breakfast with a smile on his face. He was 70 years old this year. He knew that he didn't have many years left to live. So he often reminded himself to be happy every day. In fact, there were very few things that could arouse his disgust and unhappiness. He didn't care even if his inventions failed. After all, he had failed many times in his life. So he had learned to laugh at failures. He also taught his students the same way. However, when his eyes fell on the divine arts daily, the smile on his face suddenly froze. There was no trace of a smile on his face as he read the entire newspaper. His mouth twitched for a moment as he picked up his coat and left the castle. Ryan family. Old Foulin looked at the newspaper in front of him. There was a smile in his eyes as he looked at Sander. You see, I know that he will never do things that he is not sure of. The Mellon Consortium has to swallow back all the comments that have been released by the Mellon Consortium. I reckon that tomorrow the Scott Consortium's newspaper will ridicule the Mellon Consortium's news agency for accompanying singers. Haha. These defamatory words will add a touch of brilliance to his halo of glory. Even if it's just accompanying singers, he can produce 4-star top-grade items. Don't you think it's amazing? Sander laughed as he heard his father's joke. That's why the most powerful counterattack is your own strength. It's good that you understand. Old Foulin smiled. Sander sighed. It's hard to imagine that a 16-year-old civilian boy would appear in the line of sight of all the nobles every day. Moreover, he has occupied the first page of the temple's newspaper. Perhaps today should be called Dudian Day. Old Foulin's eyes lit up as he laughed. Yes, this is a good opportunity to build momentum. Immediately contact Huasheng Consortium and other consortia. Dean is hot and they are willing to sell him a favor. Let them write about this in tomorrow's newspaper. Haha. From now on, today will be Dean Day. Chapter 317. Prayer Day. Civilians gathered in the square where the sacrificial platform was built. The priest of the Holy Church, accompanied by 3 priests of the Holy Church, went up to the platform and began to recite prayers. Tens of thousands of words of praise poems were selected from the Holy Church's Holy Bible. The civilians had long been familiar with it. After all, every household had a copy of the Holy Bible. Every year they would listen to the priest of the Holy Church's chanting. The ancient Chinese proverb was also applicable in this era. It was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The people listened carefully. They clasped their hands and fingers as they prayed devoutly. Inside the castle, Dean stood in front of the window-sill, looking at groups of civilians gathered in the nearby square from the distant streets of the castle. These people came from nearby towns. He knew that today his reputation had not reached the ears of ordinary civilians. Today should be the worst day of newspaper sales in the past 3 months, but among the top executives of major consortiums, his reputation should be spread. It would only take one day for the civilians and some nobles to know his name. In many cases, money couldn't buy fame. But fame could be converted into wealth, rights, convenience, and so on. Master, someone is looking for you. At this time, Nicholas came from behind and respectfully said. Dudian nodded. He had seen through the window that an aristocratic carriage was entering the castle. The flag on the carriage belonged to the Scott Consortium. It was obvious that the intelligence system of the Scott Consortium was far deeper and more dense than the other consortia. Dudian waved his hand to let Nicholas go out to greet him. Even a big consortium like the Scott Consortium couldn't go out to greet him personally. This wasn't arrogance but majesty and etiquette. A moment later, Nicholas brought a young lady dressed in bright jewels into the hall. She was tall and slender, with a voluptuous figure and an extremely attractive figure. Her movements were elegant and calm, and she had the etiquette and magnanimity of a noble. Dudian's eyes slightly moved as he saw her. Mr. Dean, I'm Rosie. We meet again. The young woman saw the teenager sitting in the hall. There was a trace of surprise on her face. She took the initiative to come forward. Dudian smiled and slowly got up. He waited for her to come closer. He shook her hand and said, "You are a guest. Please sit down. You're too polite to treat me as a guest." Rosie smiled and sat on a chair next to him. She looked up at the castle and enviously said, "Your castle is decorated very well. It's simple and atmospheric. I like this style the most." Dean faintly smiled. "Since you like it so much, then move in. I have plenty of rooms." Rosie was just being polite. She didn't expect Dean to be so hospitable. She responded quickly, "Well, I'll definitely come if my husband allows it. I'm afraid that my temper will give you a headache. If I interfere with your thoughts, then I won't be able to atone for my sins." Dean smiled. Miss Wei didn't come here just to see my castle, right? Rosie giggled. Both. But today I'm here to congratulate you for being promoted to senior architect. As far as I know, you are the youngest senior architect of the temple in 100 years. If Tracy hadn't become a senior architect at the age of 9 more than 150 years ago, then you would be the youngest senior architect in the history of the temple. Even if you don't do anything for the rest of your life, your name will be forever engraved in the history of the temple. Dean gently nodded. Dudian nodded. He had heard of Tracy's name. She wasn't a stranger to the people of the temple. Although 150 years had passed, but whenever they talked about the most talented person in the temple, it would be this woman. She could be described as a genuine child prodigy. At the age of 9, she had produced 2 4-star items and became a senior architect. Unfortunately, at the age of 10, she suffered from a rare disease. At that time, it was difficult to cure the disease due to the medical conditions at that time. She only had 3 months left to live when the disease was discovered. In the end, she wasn't rescued and died. Whenever this was mentioned, people would sigh with emotion. Some people even thought that if the woman didn't die, she would have become a master architect before the age of 20. Mr. Dean, can you sell your new invention, lightning rod, to the Scott Consortium? Rosie clenched her teeth as she looked at Dean. Dean looked at her and pretended to hesitate. Rosie's eyes lit up. The Scott Consortium is willing to give you a 5-star price and half of the future sales of the new textile machine. What do you think? If you have any other requirements, then I promise that I will do my best to fulfill them for you. We are old friends, right? Dean said. I heard that your consortium and the Melon Consortium have been competing for the mineral industry. I presume that your consortium has a deep penetration into the Melon Consortium? There was a trace of awakening in Rosie's eyes. I almost forgot that the Melon Consortium has tried to frame you several times. Now that your reputation is high, they will be worried that you will retaliate against them. They will come up with other insidious ways to harm you. You can rest assured that with the support of the Scott Consortium, they won't be able to hurt you. But you have to guard against insidious ways. I will ask the informants in the consortium to help you pay attention to the actions of the Melon Consortium. I will inform you if there is any news. Dean nodded. All right, we'll talk about the invention once we get the news. Rosie was startled. Mr. Dean, what do you mean? Miss Rosie is so smart. Do you not understand? Dean replied. Rosie couldn't help but ask. Mr. Dean, don't you trust me? Wouldn't we have to wait if the Melon Consortium isn't plotting against you? I trust you. But since we are talking about business, then naturally we will follow the rules of business. Dean faintly smiled. Melon Consortium will take action as soon as my news comes out. I think you should be able to find out about it. This is the first deposit. I will sell the lightning rod to you after you provide 3 valid information or after the rainy season comes next year. You can rest assured that I will keep it for your consortium. I won't talk to other consortiums for the time being. Dean smiled. Rosie was startled and her face became stiff. She forced a smile and said, Mr. Dean, lightning rod has just been released. It will definitely spread to the 3 districts tomorrow. If you sell it to us now, we will be able to produce it before the rainy season comes. In the next few months, we will also promote the roll and production process of lightning rod to maintain its popularity. If we really wait until the rainy season comes to sell it, then I'm afraid, Dean said. It depends on the intelligence capabilities of your consortium. I believe in you. Rosie smiled. She sighed as she saw that Dean didn't mean to turn back. Well, I hope that Mr. Dean can keep his promise and refuse to buy from other consortiums. I will. Dudian smiled. Rosie saw his smile. She felt uneasy in her heart. But she knew that she couldn't get any guarantees from Dean. The choice was in the hands of the latter. If she angered the other, she could change to another house. After thinking for a while, she slowly relaxed and smiled. I believe in Mr. Dean. In that case, I wish us a happy cooperation. She stretched out her slender hand. Dean shook hands. It's a pleasure to cooperate with you. There was a trace of helpless smile on Rosie's face as they loosened their hands. If I had known that Mr. Dean would have offered me a 4-star price, I would have directly agreed to it. Because of this matter I'm being scolded to death by my family. It's all your fault. She looked at Dean coquettishly. Dean's heart was calm. If you had agreed then you would have been scolded to death by your family. Rosie couldn't help but smile, but then she sighed and said, In the end it's my fault for not recognizing a true talent. Mr. Dew, please don't be offended. I didn't look down on you at that time, I just didn't expect your ability to be so amazing. Dean waved his hand. It's a trivial matter. Don't worry about it. Rosie rolled her eyes. It's good that Mr. Dean doesn't blame me. By the way, can you pre-order your next invention to our Scott Consortium? No matter what you make, our Scott Consortium is willing to pay the price of a top 4-star invention. Duddian smiled. He thought that Scott Consortium was cunning and wanted to negotiate 2 deals at once. Moreover, Scott Consortium didn't even see the shadow of the invention but dared to offer such a high price. Duddian knew that Duddian wouldn't deliberately produce an ordinary invention for this amount of money. After all, Duddian cared more about other people's respect for him than wealth. That is, face. 4 stars is too low. Dean shook his head and refused. Rosie's eyes lit up. Last time Dean didn't even think about it and refused. It showed that Dean had a new idea in his mind, and was very confident. She deliberately took a deep breath. In that case we will offer the same price as this time. What do you think? You are really willing to spend. Dean couldn't help but sigh. A 5-star invention was worth millions of gold coins. It was enough to support the food expenses of the slums for more than 30 years. If it was used for construction then, the slums could be built to the same level as the civilian area. However, the Scott Consortium was willing to pay such a large amount of money without even seeing the shadow of the invention. This was the wealth brought by the invention. This was the influence of the reputation of a genius. However, this amount of money could only be regarded as the upper level in the commercial district. The tilt of the wealth within the giant wall was seriously unbalanced. So any rich businessman in the commercial district could become a local tyrant in the slums. But in the slums, they could only sit back and eat. This was why the labor in the slums was so cheap. But not many rich businessmen were willing to live and develop in the slums. Even a fish in stagnant water would slowly suffocate. Not enough. Dean slowly shook his head. Too low. Rosie was startled. Not enough? Or too low? She couldn't help but look at Dean. Even with her self-cultivation and restraint, at this moment, she couldn't help but expose some of her inner thoughts on her face. 5-star is already the top, how much higher do you want? Dean naturally understood her expression. He shrugged and said, If you want to pre-order, pay me the money now. I can consider selling it to you at 5-star price. This is the only opportunity. Rosie almost choked and spat out a mouthful of blood. 5-star high grade? Why didn't you say it was higher? This is the only opportunity? She couldn't wait to knock on the young man's head. Could it be that he had become so arrogant that he didn't even know who he was after producing 3 high-quality divine arts in a row? If it were someone else who said this, she would probably have drawn her sword. You! Rosie swallowed her words and held back her temper. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. She forced a smile and said, You raised the price too high. I'm scared. Please don't be offended. This price is a bit, Dean asked. Does it mean that you refuse? I'm crazy if you don't refuse. Rosie couldn't help but choke in her heart. It's not a refusal. It's just that the amount of money is too much for our consortium. It seems that you can't buy it since your consortium is so poor. Dean shrugged. I've given you the opportunity. Don't say that I didn't sell you a favor. Rosie's mouth and eyelids twitched. She couldn't control her murderous aura. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at Dean's expression. She was afraid that she would lose control of her fist. She gritted her teeth. "Mr. Dean, I'll leave first. I'll inform you the first if there's news from Mellon Consortium. Take care. See off the guest." Nicholas, who was standing next to Rosie, immediately stepped forward and escorted her out of the hall. It didn't take long for Rosie to leave. Huasheng Consortium's people came to the castle to visit Dean with a lot of gift. Dean asked Nicholas to accept the expensive herbs and watches. He politely declined Huasheng Consortium's offer on the grounds that he wasn't going to sell them for the time being. He didn't directly refuse them. Huasheng Consortium was extremely disappointed as they didn't come to an agreement. They immediately made the same plan as Rosie. They wanted to pre-order Dean's next invention. Dean wasn't biased as he gave the same price as Rosie. The person in charge of Huasheng Consortium asked twice to confirm that there wasn't a problem with his ears. He was stunned for a moment before he smiled and declined. He bid farewell to Dean and left the castle. Chapter 3:18. 5-star price. The diplomat of the Green Consortium almost bit his tongue as he heard Dean's words. He looked at Dean in amazement. "Mr. Dean, did I hear it wrong, or are you didn't hear it wrong? There is only one chance. Do you want to buy it or not?" Dean was too lazy to say more. His patience had been exhausted after receiving several consortiums. For him, it was better to learn more about the knowledge in the superchip or exercise the flexibility of his left hand than to use the time to negotiate business. The diplomat of the Green Consortium saw the impatience on Dean's face. He was dumbfounded. "Mr. Dean, your price is too high. I need to go back and report to the consortium. I can't make the decision on this matter. If you can give me a reply within 2 days. Dean was too lazy to say more. He looked at Nicholas. "Send the guest off." "Yes, master." Nicholas's attitude was respectful, but his heart was shocked. He was familiar with the names of the Green Consortium, Krulov Consortium, and other consortiums. It could be said that these consortiums controlled the entire commercial district and even the mainstream economy of the entire outer wall. They were famous supergiants in the aristocratic and wealthy circles. Countless people could enjoy the plucking of their leg hair. Even a fool could see that Dean's influence and value were terrifying. "Please." He turned to the diplomat and said politely. But there was some regret in his heart. If he had known earlier, he would not have played those tricks. He would have been a prominent figure in the future if he could get Dean's trust. Just like how he once stole the property of an aristocrat and became a rich businessman. But when he went to some prestigious aristocratic family, he had to be polite to the housekeeper and servant. He didn't dare to have the slightest contempt. The diplomat sighed and shook his head. He turned and left. Dean asked Nicholas to prepare the carriage after the diplomat left. He went to the Temple of Elements to receive his senior architect medal. At the same time, he exchanged some materials he needed in the temple. Scott Financial Group. Inside the conference hall, a dozen figures were sitting on both sides of the conference table. The one sitting at the head was an old man wearing a gorgeous black suit with gold embroidery. All the nobles living in the central area knew that this was the unique attire of the Chai family. This dignified and reserved old man was the head of the Chai family, Chai Rostov. He was also the biggest director of the Scott Consortium and had the final say. "Are you sure?" Chai stared at the woman who attacked him. It was Rosie. Rosie bitterly smiled and said, "I've repeatedly confirmed it. There's no mistake. Moreover, he said that it's a friendship price. After this opportunity, he won't give it again. He's crazy." The middle-aged man on the other side of the long table widened his eyes and said angrily, 5-star high grade, and it's a friendship price? If that wasn't the friendship price, then what was? He even said that there would be no more chances after this. That's insane. This is too exaggerated. Another old man shook his head and sighed. An elegant lady next to him said in a cold voice, "If I remember correctly, he's only 16 years old, right? A 16-year-old boy has produced 3 outstanding works of magic in a row. I do admire his talent in magic. But he has to bear such a great honor at such a young age. His adoptive parents are still living in the civilian area, and there is no one to teach him. It is inevitable that he will be emotional. What a pity! I hope that when he suffers a setback, he will not be unable to recover. Now that he has been praised to such a high level, no matter what kind of genius he is, it's inevitable that he will be buried by the secular world." Another thin, middle-aged man said. Chai listened to the voices of the crowd in silence. After a moment, he slowly said, "You go and tell him that we can only offer the price of 5 stars medium grade. High grade is impossible. If he doesn't agree, then forget it. I've already given him the chance." Rosie bitterly smiled and said, "Based on my understanding of him, he won't agree. Moreover, I have also tried, but his attitude is very resolute. He isn't deliberately proposing a high price to pull us down, but rather a fixed price." Chai Rostov's mouth slightly twitched. "Then contact our informants as soon as possible. Infiltrate into Melon Consortium and steal the information about Mr. Dean. Strive to seize the lightning rod as soon as possible. The other consortiums will get the same information. No one will agree unless they are crazy." Rostov sighed. "I know. I'll do it as soon as possible." Others looked at each other but didn't continue to say anything. Although Rosie's attitude towards Dean was now a senior architect of the Temple of Elements. His potential was extremely high, so they didn't dare to talk too much behind his back. After all, although they were from the same consortium, but they weren't a family. They weren't as friendly as they looked on the surface. Temple of Elements. Dudian ordered the coachman to go directly to the Temple of Elements. The carriage had the flag of the Temple of Elements. He could freely enter and exit most of the places of the Temple of Elements except for the castles of other masters. Dean was relieved that no one recognized him along the way. He took off a mask and covered his face after arriving at the castle. He went into the hall of the temple and found the exchange office. He selected the items he needed from the catalog. After 7 or 8 minutes of selection, he finally selected 3 items. Although the effect was slightly worse than he expected, but it would be effective if the quantity was enough. Nowadays, his every move was being watched by countless people. There may be spies of other consortia lurking around the castle. He was too lazy to go to the Dark Church to buy these things. Although the Dark Church was far ahead of the Holy Church in the research of these things, but it was easy to expose his identity. Moreover, with the identity of a primary alchemist of the Dark Church, it would be difficult to buy so many things at once. 100 pounds of each, Dudian said to the person behind the exchange desk. There was a young man behind the exchange desk. He took the items from Dudian's hand. He was stunned as he saw the items that Dudian had selected. 100 pounds of each? 1 pound? Dudian nodded. I'll come back tomorrow to buy more. The young man was speechless. People buy these things by gram, but Dudian was buying by weight? I'm sorry, sir. These things are limited in stock. If you want to buy 100 pounds, then you need to be a master-level authority. If you are buying for your teacher, then please show your teacher's medal. The young man restrained his curses as he maintained a polite euphemism. Dudian took out his epic medal. Can this be counted? The young man was startled as he saw the medal. His pupils shrank as he said in astonishment, Epic medal? This. He suddenly thought of something and asked, Are you Mr. Dean? Dudian was startled as he lowered his voice. Don't be so loud. The youth came back to his senses and saw Dean wearing a mask. He immediately knew what Dean meant. Embarrassed, he smiled and said, Sorry, I couldn't control myself. Please don't mind me. I didn't recognize you. I'm really sorry. You're welcome. I'm in a hurry. Give me the order, Dudian said. The young man quickly handed over the exchange order. After a moment, Dudian filled in the order form and handed it to the young man. The young man looked at the order form and saw the name Dudian. He knew that he wasn't mistaken. Although Dudian's face was covered but his voice was very young. There was only one person in the Temple of Elements who had won the epic medal at such a young age, and that was the young man in front of him. The young man carefully put away the order form and smiled. Mr. Dean, I'll do it for you now. Dudian nodded. Then I'll trouble you. I have other things to do. Goodbye. He waved goodbye and left. Dudian returned to his castle after leaving the Temple of Elements. He looked at the mailbox at the door and asked the temple staff who was standing next to the mailbox, "Is there a letter from Dudian?" The temple staff looked at him in surprise. "Are you Mr. Dudian? There are so many letters that the mailbox can't fit all of them. I've taken them out and put them in another box." Dudian was startled. He thought that other people would write to him in addition to the temple. After all, he was a celebrity now. He immediately asked, "Is there a letter from the temple?" The temple? The staff scratched his head. "I don't know." Dudian thought for a moment. "Give me the letters from this morning. The ones from this morning are still in the mailbox. I haven't had the time to clean them out." The temple staff quickly took out the key and opened the mailbox. There were a lot of letters inside. There were at least hundreds of letters. He picked out 2 letters and put them on the other side. He arranged the rest into a neat stack and handed it to Dean. "This is yours," the staff said enthusiastically. Dudian nodded as he picked up the stack of letters. He was about to turn around and leave when he thought of something. He took out a golden bill from his pocket and handed it to the staff. "Please send all the letters to my room." "Thank you. You are too polite." The temple staff was pleasantly surprised as he repeatedly thanked Dudian. Dudian turned around and entered the castle. He met some architects along the way. They were surprised to see Dudian holding a thick stack of letters. One of them came forward. "Are you Mr. Dudian?" Dudian felt that he urgently needed an assistant to improve his efficiency. However, it was a bit difficult to find a suitable candidate. Barton and the other 2 had been seriously infected by radiation. They were vulnerable to all kinds of eyes when they came to the temple. "It's me. I have something urgent to do. Let's meet next time." Dudian politely refused. The architect bitterly gave up the idea of chasing after Dudian. He politely said a few words and then stopped to watch Dudian leave. Dean came to his own room and was about to open the door when he met Old C, who was coming out of another room. The latter was startled as he saw Dean. He didn't expect to bump into Dean so coincidentally. He locked the door and smiled. "Congratulations! I didn't expect you to be promoted to senior architect in such a short time." "Congratulations," Dudian smiled. "I believe that you will have a breakthrough soon. I'll be waiting for you in the senior architect's room." On the first day they moved in, the latter wanted to knock him down a peg. Now, the 2 of them lived on the same floor but met each other indifferently. There was a glimmer of hope in Old Man's eyes as he heard Dudian's words. "I will." Dudian nodded as he pushed the door and put the letters on the ground. Old Man's eyelids twitched as he noticed the stack of letters in Dudian's hand. He said goodbye and left. Dudian rummaged through the stack of letters to find the ones sent by the temple. The newspapers had published the news that he was promoted to senior architect. The temple must have sent him a letter to notify him. He searched for a moment and finally found a letter with a golden cover. There was a symbol of 9 star cities on it. It was the official letter cover of the temple. If others were to copy the symbol without permission, then they would be prosecuted and punished by the temple. It was a big crime. At this time, the staff of the temple came with a big box of letters. He seemed to be an ordinary person as he was tired and out of breath. Dudian was surprised as he saw the box full of letters. There were at least thousands of letters in it. He smiled bitterly and asked the staff to put the box down. After the staff left, he put the box in the room and didn't care about it. He first opened the letter in his hand and glanced at it. Sure enough, it was a letter informing him of his promotion to senior oracle. Dudian immediately put away the letter. He didn't look at the other letters on the ground as he went downstairs. He went all the way to the Apostle Castle to replace his medal. At the same time Dudian went to the Apostle Castle. Various consortia were discussing the purchase plan of Dudian's new invention. An urgent message was passed into the hands of the Holy Church and the highest authority of each consortium. What? Lost? Rudolph was shocked as he looked at the butler in front of him. How is it possible? We have been fighting with the barbarians for so many years, and we have never lost an entire fortress. How could they take it this time? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.